Marvel. I created a sanctuary in Marvel Universe. Chapter 1. United States, late 1990s. In an abandoned house, a young man sat cross-legged. He closed his eyes and concentrated, carefully sensing the fluctuations deep within his soul. An indescribable power spread from around him. The surrounding debris trembled slightly, as if shaken by an unseen impact. Whoosh! As he exhaled a long breath, the surrounding commotion gradually subsided. Sure enough, fragments of the cosmos still remain in my soul. This means that even in the Marvel Universe, I can still cultivate the cosmos. Yi Feng slowly opened his eyes. The faint yet familiar light deep within his soul finally allowed his taut mind to relax slightly. His memory still lingered on the moment he died in the celestial realm. Apollo's divine light was blazing and dazzling. When he regained consciousness, he was already in this Marvel Universe, having become a mutant. He realized that he had probably experienced a second transmigration. The intense pain in his body reminded him of the harsh reality: he had just escaped from the confines of a certain laboratory. At this moment, he was in tattered clothes, covered in wounds, and as weak as a fragile piece of paper. Being able to sense the cosmos again was undoubtedly the first ray of hope in a desperate situation for Yi Feng. In this perilous world, without power, it was impossible to move an inch. And the cosmos was his most familiar and fundamental source of power. In this world without the shackles of the gods, his path to greatness had just begun. Cough, cough, hiss. A fit of coughing tugged at his wounds, making him gasp in pain. Long-term inhuman torture had brought his body to the brink of collapse. Even if he sensed the cosmos, without the corresponding physical support, he would find it difficult to formally cultivate. I need to find a place to settle down first. Yi Feng's eyes flickered, and he quickly made a judgment. Rustle, rustle. A strange noise not far away instantly put him on alert, and he immediately entered a combat-ready state. The cosmos could not be used temporarily, but he still had his mutant ability. Element control. Manipulating all the elements in nature was still his greatest reliance at the moment. The bushes were suddenly pushed aside, and a tall, strong man rushed out. His muscles were bulging, and his eyes were fierce, like a beast that had lost its mind. It's you. The other party seemed to recognize Yi Feng, and his attacking intent clearly lessened. You escaped from there too. Yi Feng did not relax his guard. This place was already some distance from the laboratory. He had indeed released many mutants when he escaped. But whether pursuers were right behind them was anyone's guess. Yes, thanks to you. The man said, then sat down on the ground with a sigh of relief. What's your name, kid? Yi Feng did not answer. The most urgent task was to recover from his injuries. With a thought, his element control ability quietly began to operate. The wood elements in the surrounding flowers, plants, and trees gathered towards him like a summons, turning into a faint green light and slowly seeping into his body. His shriveled skin gradually regained its luster, and his wounds visibly lightened and disappeared. The green light did not last long. His body was too weak, and his control over his abilities was far from proficient. But at least, his life was saved. If my memory had awakened a little earlier. With the ability of element control, my physical body should have been even stronger than in my previous life. It's a pity my memory awakened too late. Yi Feng was a bit helpless. He had been born into this body. Because he had died in the celestial realm, and the consumption of crossing world barriers was too great, his soul had remained dormant. Otherwise, he would not have been captured by those people and taken to the laboratory. If his consciousness had awakened during infancy, his cosmos cultivation might have already reached the eighth sense. The mutant ability of element control was simply tailor-made for cosmos cultivation. However, awakening now was not too late. At least, everything still had a chance. The man silently watched the entire process, a hint of surprise flashing in his eyes, but he didn't ask further. My name is Logan, he said. We're not truly safe yet. If you don't mind, we can go together. Logan. Yi Feng looked up. Is your ability self-healing? He almost immediately guessed the other party's identity. Wolverine, one of the protagonists in mutant stories. You know me. Probably saw it in the laboratory files. Logan said nonchalantly. In such a place, mutants were somewhat familiar with each other. Do you have a destination? Yi Feng asked. No. But it's best to head towards the city. Logan shook his head. Long years of wandering had made him forget the way home. Let's go, we can't stay here long. Yi Feng stood up. One treatment, though far from enough to fully recover him, at least allowed him to move without major issues. Logan didn't say much and stood up as well. The two walked out of the dilapidated house, one after the other. Dawn was breaking, and the faint light of the sunrise seemed to crown their newfound freedom. Is the situation for mutants always this bad? Yi Feng suddenly asked. Although he knew this was the Marvel Universe, he wasn't sure which parallel universe it was. More or less. Logan twitched his lips. Ever since mutants were exposed during the Cold War, life hasn't been good. I've been captured many times, and relying on not being able to die, I've endured it all, but I've suffered a lot. His self-healing ability was the curse of immortality and the source of endless torment. After all, no matter how strong he was still immortal, and modern weapons made it easy to control him. Then have you heard of Captain America? Steve Rogers. Yi Feng asked tentatively. Steve Rogers. Logan frowned and thought for a moment. No impression. Someone with that title should be very famous, right? Yi Feng's eyes flickered, and he already had an answer in his heart. If there were no surprises, this should be a parallel universe centered on mutants. The Avengers, perhaps, did not exist at all. His experiences in the previous two lives told him, when weak, a lone wolf struggles to survive. He needed allies. Especially allies with infinite potential like mutants. There are generally two mainstream theories regarding the origin of mutants. One is the Celestials, God creation experiments, where they, as proxies of the Creator, created countless lives in the universe, including the eternal and the beyonders. The other points to the genetic legacy of a fallen god. Regardless of which, it implies that mutants have an extremely high ceiling. Especially Omega-level mutants, whose strength is almost limitless. However, looking across many parallel universes, the fate of mutants is often not bright. Since Yi Feng was already in this game of chess, the only thing he could do was try his best to break the deadlock. What awaited him was complete oblivion. He would not entrust his fate to the ethereal timeline resets of the mutants. That was the most foolish approach. The forest was exceptionally quiet at night. Yi Feng and Logan cleared a small area, and the hellfire wasn't intense, but it was enough to ward off the night's chill. Some bloodstains remained by the bonfire, left by the animals Logan had hunted. Our luck seems good, those guys didn't follow us. Logan flipped the roasted rabbit in his hand and smiled. Logan, have you ever thought about changing the plight of mutants? Yi Feng suddenly spoke. Logan was startled by the question. That's not something I should be thinking about. I'm not strong enough. As far as I know, there are quite a few mutants who want to do that. For example, the Hellfire Club, and later Magneto and Professor X. They are all extremely powerful mutants. But even so, they still couldn't change this world's view of mutants. The existence of mutants, to humans, is like the sword of Damocles hanging over their heads. It could fall at any time. Humans both fear and covet the abilities of mutants. In my opinion, peaceful coexistence between humans and mutants is not yet possible. Logan's tone was calm, yet carried the vicissitudes of years. He had lived for nearly 200 years, saved people, and been saved, witnessing both the light and darkness of human nature. Therefore, he held no hope. His past kindness had only brought him endless trauma. Kid, it's good that you have this idea. But I don't want you to go to extremes. Logan added. Yi Feng's abilities were very powerful. Although he hadn't fully revealed them during their travels together these past few days, Logan could guess a few things. It was a power that even Magneto could hardly achieve. So, to solve the problem between humans and mutants, we must start from the root. To truly achieve peace, there is only one way. Yi Feng's eyes sparkled with the light of contemplation. In my hometown, a great man once said, if you do not erupt in silence, you will perish in silence. If mutants and humans continue to oppose each other like this, the outcome will only be mutual destruction. Either humanity perishes, or mutants are eradicated. But who still remembers that we originally belonged to the same group? The best way is to completely break the existing pattern. Create a whole new social system. Yi Feng's words made Logan's movements pause slightly. He was stunned by this bold idea. In nearly 200 years, he had traveled various countries, deeply understanding the complexity and stability of the current world order. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been two world wars. Let extraordinary powers enter the public eye and no longer be a secret. Lift this mysterious veil and popularize the extraordinary. Build a new order based on humanity, with mutants as the path to advancement. Yi Feng continued. Your idea, it's too crazy. I don't think you can achieve it. Logan said this, but he knew in his heart that this plan was indeed feasible in some sense. The premise was that Yi Feng truly possessed the ability to execute all of this. Interested in helping me, Logan? Or are you planning to continue living aimlessly like this? In Yi Feng's view, Logan was a natural Saint Seiya candidate. His powerful regenerative ability allowed his body to constantly break through limits, making it easy for him to reach the peak of human potential and then perceive the power of cosmos. As long as Yi Feng planted the light of cosmos in him, once awakened, Logan could break through his current strength shackles. More importantly, Yi Feng vaguely felt that he might be able to become an existence similar to Cronus in the Marvel Universe. Although this was still just a hypothesis, if successful, everyone whose cosmos he ignited would become a helper on his path of cultivation. Omega power was precisely the power of belief formed by the convergence of the cosmos light of billions of beings. This was a conclusion Yi Feng reached after much exploration in the Saint Seiya world. So, do you have a clear destination now? Logan looked at Yi Feng, his expression serious. Of course, the Vatican. I want to stand openly before the whole world. If I become the Pope, with the support of thousands of believers, no one would dare to easily touch me. And my abilities happen to help me achieve this step. As he spoke, a golden light gradually emanated from Yi Feng's palm. The light was warm and peaceful. Logan just watched quietly and felt much calmer inside. My ability is element control. As the name suggests, I can control all elements in the world. This means I can easily create miracles that are usually not apparent. I can mass-produce gold, so I'll never be short of money. I can also extract the life essence of flowers, plants, and trees to heal injuries and illnesses. Even achieve limb regeneration and extend life. Using this to gain benefits among high-ranking officials and financial magnates in various countries. Currently, the existence of mutants has not been exposed on a large scale. This is the best opportunity. Once I succeed, I will become the spokesperson of God, or even become God himself. When saying these words, Yi Feng's tone remained calm. He had personally seen gods and fought with gods. These experiences made him no longer easily moved by grand visions. Everything he did was just paving the way for himself. The existence of mutants directly pointed to the Celestials. Those beings that existed since the beginning of creation were not easy to deal with. They were the masterminds behind countless major events in Marvel. Then what about then? When you become a new god, will you still adhere to your current ideas? Logan looked up, gazing at Yi Feng solemnly. Of course. I have no obsession with becoming a god. But I am confident in becoming the founder of a new era, and also the guardian of the future order. Even if I am gone many years later, this system will still continue to operate. Humans are the foundation, and mutants are the evolved form within humanity, possessing more powerful abilities. Only by integrating with each other can we go further. Moreover, threats don't only come from within. Yi Feng's words carried deep meaning, but Logan didn't fully comprehend. Aliens and such were still too distant for him now. After a long silence, Logan finally spoke again. My strength is not particularly strong. Even if I help you, I'm afraid it will be difficult to help you reach such a height. Yi Feng smiled slightly. He knew that Logan had already agreed. This was his first ally since coming to this world. Just leave the rest to me. Your potential is far more than this. Although he wasn't sure what method Yi Feng had to enhance his strength, Logan would not go back on his word once he made a promise. So, our next destination is the Vatican. That's right. After finishing the last bit of food, the two carefully cleaned up the scene, ensuring no traces were left. The surroundings were silent, with only the rustling of leaves in the wind. They moved stealthily in the predetermined direction, guided by the faint moonlight. In the distance, the outline of a not-so-large town appeared, with flickering lights in the darkness. The town was home to several thousand people, most of whom were likely asleep at this hour. Be careful, Logan whispered, cautiously scanning his surroundings. Those guys might have set up an ambush in the town. He paused, then added. After all, that town is the only supply point within several hundred kilometers. Logan quickly made his judgment based on his many years of experience. The laboratory where they were previously trapped was located in a remote, sparsely populated area of the United States. This location choice was twofold. First, for concealment, and second, to ensure that even if a mutant managed to escape, it would be difficult for him to completely hide his tracks and obtain supplies in a short period. Don't worry, my body has recovered a bit these past 2 days. Yi Feng responded softly, his voice carrying a hint of fatigue but also determination. With my ability, they won't discover us. As he spoke, Yi Feng had already subtly activated the surrounding natural elements. A faint shimmer in the air gently rippled, and an invisible energy slowly covered both of them. It was an invisibility cloak woven from pure elements, not only visually undetectable but also completely obscuring their body heat. We don't have much time. We need to get some supplies and money, then leave here quickly. Yi Feng said in a low voice while maintaining his ability. Although I released many mutants when I escaped the laboratory, that won't buy us much time. He looked at Logan, his tone grave. You must know who controls these types of laboratories, right? The power and technology they wield pose a great threat to us right now. In fact, if it weren't to leave this troubled area as quickly as possible, Yi Feng would never take this risk. It was still thousands of kilometers from the Vatican. Without transportation and enough money, it would take several months for the two of them to reach it on foot, if at all. Yi Feng didn't want to waste time here. Several months would be enough for him to do many more important things. I know. Logan nodded, his expression serious. He fully understood Yi Feng's meaning. Under Yi Feng's elemental cover, the two moved silently into the town like shadows blending into the night. With their figures, heat signatures, and sounds completely hidden, they didn't disturb anyone, not even causing a single dog bark. The town was immersed in the quiet of the deep night, most windows were dark, and only a few streetlights cast dim, yellow halos. However, Logan's beast-like intuition keenly detected an anomaly. This town was clearly carefully deployed, some hidden corners and vantage points were equipped with weapons and surveillance equipment, and a subtle, hard-to-detect tension permeated the air. Indeed, my hunch was correct. Logan said to Yi Feng in an almost inaudible voice. This town is a supply point they set up, and also a trap. Let's go, don't waste time. Yi Feng's face appeared even paler in the moonlight. My body can't last much longer right now. The distance from the forest to the town wasn't very far, only about a few kilometers, but continuously using his ability was a huge burden for Yi Feng. They quietly arrived at the entrance of the supermarket in the town center. Yi Feng concentrated, extending his ability to the entire building, forming an energy barrier that isolated signals and sounds. Logan seized the opportunity to move swiftly, skillfully gathering the necessary supplies. Compressed dry rations and high-energy chocolate were the first choice. They were small, provided quick and ample energy. At the same time, he also found several $1,000 in cash at the supermarket's checkout counter and quickly put it into his backpack. Go. Just a minute or two later, Logan darted out of the supermarket, his backpack already stuffed full. He also had a car key in his hand, taken from a hook on the side of the supermarket. Will it work? Logan shook the key in his hand, looking at Yi Feng. It will work, if the map is correct, it can last until that city. Once my ability wears off, we'll have to change this car. He understood Logan's intention, this car was just a temporary solution. Alright. Logan didn't delay. The two quickly walked towards an old pickup truck parked next to the supermarket. Yi Feng once again activated his energy, enveloping the entire vehicle, and just like that, a car seemed to evaporate into thin air. Opening the door, starting the engine, which ran almost silently, under Logan's skilled operation, the car sped out of the town like a ghost, completely without alerting any lurking individuals. Even the armed personnel deployed in the town didn't notice a thing. Yi Feng's element control ability was indispensable for his escape from the laboratory. It could not only distort light and isolate heat but also temporarily interfere with electronic signals, forming a comprehensive stealth barrier. The accelerator was floored, and the car's engine roared lowly on the open road, its speed rapidly increasing to the limit. The United States road system in this era was indeed commendable, especially the highways outside the city, where vehicles were sparse, and there was no worry of traffic jams, providing ideal conditions for their escape. The next destination is about 200 kilometers away. Logan checked the map by the faint light of the dashboard. It clearly marked their current location and the road ahead. This car might not have enough fuel to last until then. Let's go as far as we can. Yifeng leaned back in the seat, his eyes closed, his face ashen. I need to recover. He took out an emerald green glass bead from his arms. It was a life energy crystal he had painstakingly extracted and compressed from the surrounding natural vegetation using his own ability. Yifeng had put in a lot of effort to create it, precisely to save his own life when he was exhausted. As the life energy entered his body, a warm current gradually spread, and Yifeng's complexion visibly regained its color. Although the recovered energy wasn't much, it was at least enough to ensure his ability wouldn't fail temporarily. The journey was silent. Logan focused on the steering wheel, his sharp eyes fixed on the road ahead, while Yifeng closed his eyes to rest, recovering as much strength as possible. After the vehicle had traveled about 300 kilometers, the pickup truck finally ran out of fuel and slowly stopped in the middle of the road. How far is it to the destination? The moment the car stopped, Yifeng opened his eyes, his voice still somewhat weak but clear. Less than 20 kilometers. Logan rechecked the map by the faint light of dawn. At my speed, carrying you, we should get there quickly. It's not fully light yet, so we should still be unexposed. Let's go. Yifeng replied concisely, slumping onto Logan's sturdy back. Logan carried Yifeng and set off, speeding towards the distant city. Shortly after they left, the signal from the abandoned pickup truck on the roadside suddenly reappeared. Almost at the same moment, the piercing alarm of the town's monitoring center suddenly blared, breaking the silence of the night. How could that vehicle appear 300 kilometers away? The captain of the tracking team's face changed drastically, and he slammed his fist on the control panel. We've been played. Yifeng and Logan silently broke through the blockade long ago. A team member stared intently at the screen, his voice subdued but unable to hide his shock. They not only blocked all signals but also managed to leave the town without alarming anyone. This is incredible. Such mutants are perfect killing machines born for the battlefield, the captain said, gritting his teeth. These battle-hardened soldiers knew it all too well. The abilities Yifeng displayed were almost the ultimate assassination method all intelligence agencies and special forces dreamed of. Report it immediately. Initiate emergency pursuit procedures. The captain roared, spinning around to face the communications officer. Notify all units. That kid must not escape. The message was quickly relayed, and the powerful forces behind the laboratory sprang into action. Everyone understood that as long as Yifeng was brought back under control, all previous losses could be ignored. Yifeng's detailed file was quickly presented to the high-level officials of the experimental project. Why did no one realize how terrifying his abilities were for so many years? The laboratory's financier was furious after seeing the report, slamming his fist on the mahogany desk, even splashing coffee from his cup. Sir, he has always been hiding something, a researcher explained nervously, pushing up his glasses. All records show that he could only manipulate light perception to achieve basic optical invisibility. But from the details of his escape this time, he never displayed his true mutant abilities during all the years he was with us. Contact the people in the city, set up all checkpoints, and absolutely do not let him escape, the financier said coldly to his assistant, suppressing his anger. To establish a mutant laboratory of this scale, the forces at his disposal were naturally not to be underestimated. In addition to an elite private security force, he also had intricate connections with major gangs across the United States. And the city Yifeng and Logan were heading to was one of his most heavily fortified areas. Yes, boss, the assistant replied in a low voice, quickly picking up the communicator to begin deployment. Meanwhile, Logan was sneaking into the city with Yifeng on his back. This was a small city with a stagnant economy and severe population loss, located in one of the more barren states in the U.S. Midwest, far from the bustling metropolises like New York or Washington. The streets were wide but sparsely populated, with more abandoned houses than lit windows. The two quietly snuck into an empty house with a good view, temporarily hiding in a south-facing room on the second floor. I'm afraid we've been exposed. Yi Feng leaned against the wall, his face ashen. Despite 2 days of rest, his body was still extremely weak. The continuous use of element control abilities had almost drained his mental and physical strength. Since awakening his abilities, he had lived under the shackles of an inhibitor, never having the chance to truly train this power. If not for the sudden awakening of his innate wisdom, which allowed him to recall deeper psychokinetic techniques, they would probably still be trapped in the laboratory. You look, can you really hold on? Logan frowned, a rare hint of worry in his voice. I'll be fine after some rest. Yi Feng closed his eyes, trying to steady his breathing. The next period is the most crucial. This is an urban area. They won't dare to use heavy weapons, at most only light firepower clashes. This is advantageous for us. As long as we break out of here, the sky's the limit. Still according to the original plan. I'll be the bait? Logan asked in a deep voice. Yes. But the resistance should be smaller than expected. Yi Feng managed a faint smile. Judging from the town's reaction and the current commotion, the previous riot at the laboratory caused them heavy losses, otherwise, we would have heard helicopters by now. All right. Logan said no more. The moment he turned around, his eyes changed drastically. It was as if he had returned to being the cold-blooded killer on the battlefield, with only an icy killing intent remaining in his eyes. He knew that his almost immortal body and astonishing self-healing ability made him an incredibly valuable research subject for the powerful who craved the secret of eternal life. Because of this, he had volunteered to be the bait, attracting all firepower. I need to hurry. Yi Feng struggled to sit upright. The elemental energy floating in the air slowly began to flow into his body. Even without actively using his abilities, this energy would continuously nourish his flesh and internal organs. Wisps of faint, multicolored light circulated around him, flickering on and off, appearing particularly mysterious in the dim room. Meanwhile, Logan moved like a ghost through the city alleys, soon reaching the eastern part of the city, more than 10 kilometers from Yi Feng's hiding spot. He immediately spotted armed gang members on patrol. As expected, it's even slower than Yi Feng anticipated. Logan's lips curled into a cold sneer. The next second, he lunged forward, bone claws tearing through his skin, their sharpness suddenly revealed. Roar. A beast-like roar, the whistling of bullets, and human screams instantly shattered the night's tranquility. Shoot. Keep shooting. Kill him. The leading gang member yelled hoarsely, his rifle continuously spitting fire, but he could never lock onto Logan's ghostly figure. Even if an occasional bullet hit, it was instantly nullified by his healing ability. Monster, that guy can't be killed. Blood splattered everywhere, and many gang members broke down psychologically, starting to flee in a frenzy. The security team, which had just arrived in the city, also received the news and immediately deployed in tactical formation, converging on Logan's position from multiple directions. I need to make more noise. Logan's eyes were cold. He picked up a dropped submachine gun and unhesitatingly sprayed bullets around. Gunfire flashed, and blood bloomed like dark night flowers, one after another. Time passed minute by minute. Logan, like a tireless killing machine, weaved and fought between the gang members and security personnel. He had no mercy for these people. They oppressed civilians, trafficked drugs, and committed crimes, so their deaths were not to be pitied. Suddenly, he sensed something was wrong. The enemy's formation began to change, their movements became more coordinated, and their cooperation showed signs of being well trained. Logan licked the blood from the corner of his mouth, revealing a bloodthirsty smile. Finally, something decent has arrived. He knew the laboratory's security team had arrived. Those guys were all soldiers who had undergone professional training in baptism by fire. They were not comparable to those gang members. The fierce gunfire in the city, even over 10 kilometers away, clearly reached Yi Feng's ears in the dead of night. But he did not move. He merely sat silently in the center of the abandoned room, surrounded by an ethereal flow of element control. They were like tiny fireflies, continuously seeping into his skin, repairing his overtaxed body, and even his nearly depleted soul gradually revived in this nourishment. The distant gunshots and shouts never ceased. Yi Feng used this to judge Logan's safety. As long as the sounds continued, it meant Logan still controlled the situation and was still alive. Fortunately, his judgment was mostly accurate. That laboratory riot had clearly caused severe losses to the other side, and well-trained combat personnel could not be replenished overnight. Every veteran who could truly survive in a hellish battlefield was forged through time and blood. The other battlefield had long turned into a bloody hell. Logan was covered in blood, his heavy gasps particularly clear in the brief silence. He casually tossed aside his empty rifle, and the ground beneath him was a mess. After an entire night of high-intensity fighting, the number of gang members who had fallen under his bone claws was at least 80, if not 100. Shattered limbs and congealed blood covered the streets, and this already desolate city now resembled a forgotten frontline battlefield. Under the manipulation of capital, the police station's lights never came on, and the city's residents kept their doors and windows tightly shut, no one daring to venture out at this time. "This guy is really a pain in the ass," a security team member whispered, his voice tinged with undisguised fatigue and shock. Before coming to apprehend him, they had all thoroughly studied Logan's files. But theoretical knowledge was far less terrifying than facing him in person. A nearly immortal self-healing body, coupled with extreme killing experience accumulated over 2 world wars. Frankly, trying to capture him alive was as difficult as ascending to the heavens. In open terrain, they might still be able to suppress him with firepower and formation. The last time Logan was successfully captured was in a barren wilderness with no cover. But in this intricate urban close-quarters combat, Logan's experience and instincts were amplified to the extreme, while their firepower advantage was infinitely compressed. This was precisely why Yi Feng and Logan chose this place as their battlefield. Absolutely do not let him get close. Otherwise, even if you don't die, you'll be crippled. The captain of the squad roared again in reminder, his voice hoarse. Maintain groups of 5, with no more than 20 meters between groups. Strictly execute cross-cover tactics, don't give him any chance. This elite tactical squad of 20, all battle-hardened veterans, dared not relax in the slightest at this moment. Everyone knew that facing such a monster, even a slight mistake would mean instant death. In their blind spot, Logan was hidden deep within a narrow, dark alley, leaning against a cold, damp brick wall. It should be about time. He spat out a mouthful of bloody saliva and looked up at the sky. The distant sky was already tinged with the white of dawn. Nearly 5 hours had passed since he started the commotion. According to Yi Feng's original plan, 4 hours would have been enough. But for safety, he deliberately dragged it out for an extra hour. Feeling his stamina recover slightly, Logan began to move quickly in the direction he had agreed upon with Yi Feng. He's trying to escape. The tactical squad immediately noticed his intention. Don't forget the other mutant. Yi Feng is the primary target. The captain instantly realized, his heart sinking. He's going to rendezvous with Yi Feng. They had all seen the information on Yi Feng, but all records might only be the tip of the iceberg. According to the trembling supplementary report from the laboratory researchers, Yi Feng's abilities had never truly manifested or developed during years of confinement. This meant they knew nothing about his true capabilities. Facing a mutant, the unknown was often the most fatal. Inside the abandoned house, the dazzling light swirling around Yi Feng gradually receded, eventually disappearing completely. He slowly opened his eyes. Click, click. As he stretched his body, a series of crisp cracking sounds came from his joints, and a surging sense of power coursed through his limbs. I didn't expect to recover so much after this night of elemental baptism. He was slightly surprised. The rest of the past few days was far less effective than this time. Clearly, recovering after overdrawing his abilities was a form of tempering. It seems that abilities can only grow when used to their limits. He seemed to realize something. At this moment, subtle air currents brought him information. He smelled the familiar, strong scent of blood in the wind, approaching from afar. He's here. Without a moment's hesitation, Yi Feng moved, rushing out of the abandoned house and actively heading in Logan's direction. Da da da, da da da. Sporadic gunshots still tried to stop Logan, but suddenly, all sounds were drowned out by a deeper roar. The ground began to tremble violently. Finally, Logan grinned, a look of relief on his blood-stained face. He knew Yi Feng had arrived. Crash. The next moment, the concrete paved ground seemed to turn into a surging sea, suddenly raising a giant wave of earth and rock up to a meter high. The wave advanced at an astonishing speed, its momentum terrifying. What is this? Is it an earthquake? The faces of the tactical squad members changed drastically, their formation instantly torn apart by this force like the wrath of nature. Many were violently thrown several meters, falling heavily and temporarily losing their ability to move. Yi Feng walked steadily out of the smoke and shadow, his eyes cold. He clenched his right hand in the air towards the fallen crowd. In an instant, that section of ground collapsed and writhed like quicksand, swallowing all the incapacitated team members. In just a moment, the ground returned to flatness, as if nothing had ever happened. After doing all this, Yi Feng's face was slightly pale, but his breathing remained steady. Compared to his previous weakness, he had now regained the strength for direct combat. You recovered faster than expected. Logan strode over. Not enough. Yi Feng shook his head, his gaze sweeping over the ruined street. The plan went smoothly, and the results are better than expected. They are no longer a threat for now. They couldn't stay here long. The commotion they caused was too great, they had to leave immediately. Logan followed behind Yi Feng, casually tearing off his tattered clothes, which were already soaked in blood and stiff. They broke into an unguarded clothing store nearby, quickly changed their outfits, and then jumped into an unlocked car on the roadside. With the roar of the engine, they drove straight out of the smoke-filled city. Only at this point did the two truly temporarily escape the laboratory's controlled view. One day later, when the financiers behind the laboratory finally found the missing tactical squad, only a stretch of heavily excavated, ruined street remained at the scene. Dozens of pits, 1 to 2 meters deep, were scattered everywhere, as if silently testifying to the inhuman power they had faced that day. The on-site manager looked at the mess and could only sigh helplessly. This is big trouble. They knew full well that once Yi Feng fully recovered and completely mastered his terrifying abilities, everyone involved in the experimental project would become a target on his revenge list. Immediately destroy all financial transaction records related to the laboratory. Initiate the self-destruct sequence, and completely blow up that laboratory. Listening to his subordinate's report, the financier behind the laboratory almost squeezed these two commands through gritted teeth. That state-of-the-art laboratory, into which astronomical sums of money had been invested, now had to be personally destroyed. They knew better than anyone that any trace could lead Yi Feng to them, and then their lives would no longer be safe. After hanging up the phone, the financier could no longer suppress his towering rage, sweeping a valuable ornament off the table with a punch. If I can't have it, no one else will. Distribute all information and whereabouts clues about Yi Feng and Logan. He ordered his trusted subordinate, word by word, a ruthless glint in his eyes. I want them to never know peace. The mystery of immortality represented by Logan, and Yi Feng's assassination methods comparable to a battlefield shadow, these two were enough to drive all ambitious people in the world mad. I didn't expect the two of us to become so sought after. Logan raised the stack of intelligence he had just received, a helpless smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Having lived for so long, he naturally had his own network of information. Sure enough, not long after the information about him and Yi Feng was made public, Logan found detailed files about them in an underground intelligence exchange. Clearly priced, accessible to everyone. It was the first time he had been so openly displayed, and the feeling was both strange and new. Sunlight filtered through the sparse leaves, dappling his slightly weathered face, flickering on and off. No need to care. This is actually a good thing for us. Yi Feng's tone was calm, as if he was talking about something unrelated to him. A good thing. Now everyone wants to find us and turn us in for a bounty. Logan raised an eyebrow, casually stuffing the intelligence into his jacket pocket, his tone carrying a hint of confusion. They are promoting us for free, boosting our prestige. Yi Feng smiled slightly, slowly stepping out of the shadow. Moreover, destroy what you can't get. This is one of humanity's most common flaws. He was not flustered. The other party making the information about him and Logan public, in a sense, saved him the trouble of self-promotion. There's a saying that's true. Become famous early. Look at Magneto Eric, then look at Professor X Charles. Both gained fame early on before they could rally the Brotherhood of Mutants and the X-Men. Almost all the well-known mutants in the world had already been recruited by these two factions. Even Logan was a fortuitous find for Yi Feng. Therefore, Yi Feng was not worried. As long as his body fully recovered and his cosmos cultivation was complete, all these troubles before him would be nothing but fleeting clouds. How much further are we from the Vatican? Yi Feng changed the subject, his voice steady. Logan unfolded the crumpled map, his finger tracing it as he roughly estimated, about 1,000 kilometers more. The Vatican is located inland in Europe, and they still had to find a way to cross the sea. He folded the map, put it back into his backpack, his movements swift with a hint of impatience. Are you really confident you can become the Pope? Logan couldn't help but confirm again. Even though he had witnessed Yi Feng's extraordinary abilities, this goal still sounded too distant, almost unbelievable. Don't worry, no problem. Yi Feng's tone remained calm, yet carried an undeniable certainty. The emergence of mutants is not a crisis for the Catholic Church, but an unprecedented opportunity. He paused, looking at the distant rolling mountains, his eyes seeming to glow. Ever since atheism became widely spread, the Catholic Church's status and influence in various countries have been continuously declining. And my appearance. His tone grew stronger. Will be their only turning point to return to the core of the world. His words were calm, yet carried an indescribable weight, as if the position of Pope was already within his grasp. In the Marvel universe, gods are not myths, but beings who intervene in reality in various ways. Baldur, the god of light in Norse mythology, had already fallen, his death ushering in Ragnarok. Apollo, the god of light in Greek mythology, had almost no presence. Even God himself, his existence was repeatedly demoted and reinterpreted, to the point where he was eventually untraceable. Among the four ancient gods from Earth's creation, Haps, representing the side of light, was devoured by the god of the underworld Chthon and the serpent god Set, bringing the concept of death to gods for the first time, directly triggering a chaotic war among ancient deities that nearly destroyed the multiverse. The only truly powerful light entity might be the primal light from the universe's beginning, which was also the opposite of Null, the god of symbiotes, possessing venom to make him the god of light and defeat Null. Considering all this, the Catholic Church's situation in the Marvel world was far from as transcendent as in the real world. Without actual divine miracles, relying solely on doctrine and faith, it struggled to compete with religions that truly had gods endorsing them. It was precisely for this reason that Yi Feng set his sights here. Although the Vatican is a tiny place, it has hundreds of millions of followers worldwide and an irreplaceable spiritual status. As long as he could become the Son of God, the successor to the Pope, his position would be high enough to oversee the entire world's chess game. The black market bounty did not greatly affect the two's journey. Monitoring equipment was not yet advanced in this era, and the transportation network was far from as dense as in later generations. Precisely tracking two people's whereabouts was like looking for a needle in a haystack. Even if this world would give rise to countless black technologies in the future, that was a matter for later. Recalling his thoughts, the two continued their silent journey. The wind blew across the wilderness, raising fine dust, and their footsteps sounded particularly clear in the silence. After this period of recuperation, Yi Feng's body had basically recovered to a normal human level, and his element control ability was gradually returning. Currently, using a single element was basically without burden, but operating composite elements still caused a significant drain. He estimated that at least until his cosmos cultivation reached the sixth sense, element control could truly exert its due power. To reach its peak, he would need to break through to the seventh sense. The potential of this ability far exceeded its surface, and Yi Feng even vaguely felt that it might not be impossible to ascend to godhood with it. Logan, when we reach the Vatican, we can temporarily split up. Yi Feng suddenly spoke, breaking the long silence. Okay. Logan answered surprisingly directly. He was not suited for a solemn and heavy place like the Vatican anyway, and Yi Feng's suggestion actually made him relieved. He was more accustomed to acting freely, rather than being constrained by the red tape of a religious center. I will prepare some things for you then. Yi Feng continued, his tone serious. Before I fully recover my strength, you only have one thing to do: temper your body. Logan was a little surprised, turning to look at Yi Feng. Is my body not strong enough now? He had always been confident in his physical fitness, far surpassing ordinary people, and with his almost immortal healing factor, he had never doubted his physical condition. Far from enough. Yi Feng shook his head, his gaze sharp. You rely too much on your healing ability and haven't pushed the potential of your physical body to its limit. Without the troubles of hidden injuries and diseases, you should be able to break through human physical limits more easily. This is the direction you should take next. Logan was silent for a moment, then finally nodded solemnly. I understand. He clenched his fist, feeling the surging power within him, and began to seriously consider Yi Feng's words. Perhaps, he really could become stronger. Time flowed on, and a week later, after several transfers, the two finally set foot on Italian soil. The exotic customs and scenery gradually unfolded before them. Ancient buildings, fluttering flags, a strange yet pleasant language, everything indicated that they were close to their destination. The Vatican was now within reach. Although Yi Feng and Logan had already left the US, the storm they stirred up had not yet subsided. The two giants of the mutant world had both obtained detailed information regarding Yi Feng and Logan. Immortality, and unknown. Professor Charles gazed at the two files in his hand, his brows tightly furrowed. He temporarily set Logan's file aside. He actually knew quite a bit about Logan. After all, he was a mutant who had been active in the world for over 100 years, with his footprints left almost all over the globe. Professor Charles, in his youth, even had a brief encounter with him. It was a pity that he was not mature enough at the time, and ultimately could only brush past Logan. Now seeing Logan's file again, he couldn't help but feel surprised. Someone as untamed as Logan would actually choose to become an assistant to others. Professor Charles brought Yi Feng's file before his eyes. 18 years old, Chinese American. Abilities unknown. Currently demonstrated abilities include light energy manipulation, signal shielding, controlling Earth. Suspected of possessing self-healing abilities. The further he read, the tighter his brows furrowed. This file was extremely detailed, even completely recording how Yi Feng entered the laboratory and how he escaped from there. What concerned Professor Charles the most was the description of Yi Feng's abilities. He had seen mutants with multiple abilities before, but such individuals were either extremely powerful or completely out of control. Someone like Yi Feng, who exhibited such stability, had almost never appeared. Having suffered inhuman torment for a long time, it's hard to guarantee that his psyche won't turn dark. Troublesome. Professor Charles rubbed his temples. Most of the mutants he was familiar with carried wounds that were difficult to heal. The awakening of abilities was often accompanied by loss of control and danger, and few mutants managed to pass through the early stages of their abilities smoothly. Cases like Yi Feng's were the extreme of extremes. If Yi Feng was truly as powerful as the file described, once his abilities were fully awakened, he would inevitably seek revenge on society. This was Professor Charles's first reaction after reading the file. Hank, I need to use the cerebro. After a moment of contemplation, Professor Charles finally made a decision. He had to find Logan and Yi Feng as soon as possible. This was his advantage. If Magneto got there first, the consequences would be unimaginable. On the other side, Magneto Eric also received information about Yi Feng and Logan. Hire us to deal with Yi Feng. It seems those people are truly anxious. Eric smirked. To secure living space for mutants, he and Professor Charles had taken completely different paths. The Brotherhood of Mutants occasionally accepted commissions from some conglomerates to handle shady tasks. For example, assassinations. Boss, are we taking this job? Mystique Raven, standing by, spoke softly. Eric shook his head almost without hesitation. No. Although the remuneration is generous, based on the current information, the Chinese mutant named Yi Feng has unknown abilities. I suspect they are hiding something. His true abilities might far exceed what this document describes. A thoughtful look flashed in Eric's eyes. To be able to establish the Brotherhood of Mutants in such a situation, he was by no means a foolish person. Especially when it came to missions involving hunting down fellow mutants, he was even more cautious. A single misstep could cause the cohesion of their people to crumble. Moreover, his intuition told him, Yi Feng was definitely not simple. As for Logan, he didn't pay him much mind. However, we still need to track their whereabouts. This Yi Feng might be someone we can win over. Eric put down the paper in his hand, his tone firm. Understood. Mystique Raven nodded in response. From a strategic value perspective alone, Yi Feng was indeed extraordinary. If he could be brought into the Brotherhood, it would undoubtedly be a decisive force. In the underground base deep within the Mutant Academy at the Xavier Mansion, the long-sealed Cerebro was reactivated, and a faint blue light rapidly flowed along the precise circuits, illuminating the entire space. Professor Charles put on the specially designed helmet according to the procedure. This device could greatly enhance his psychic abilities, causing his already powerful brainwaves to undergo a qualitative leap, his mental power sufficient to cover the entire world. However, it was precisely this terrifying ability that, in countless parallel timelines, repeatedly pushed mutants to the brink of despair. The fundamental reason was that Professor Charles was too idealistic. He always believed that humans and mutants could coexist peacefully, yet he underestimated the greed and fear of politicians. No one wanted to live daily under a sword hanging over their heads. To seek peace through peace, then peace perishes, to seek peace through struggle, then peace endures. As a great man once said, strike one punch, to avoid 100 punches. This was also the principle Yi Feng had always believed in. Yi Feng, who was on his way, suddenly paused, his expression serious as he looked up. A powerful mental wave swept across the sky like a tide, as if an invisible eye was scanning the entire world. Such powerful psychic energy. He murmured, as if he had already seen the network of thoughts covering Earth. Professor X. Charles Xavier. Is he coming for me? Just as his thoughts raced, Logan's eyes beside him suddenly changed. The wildness that 100 years had failed to erase quietly faded. His body was still the same, but his demeanor abruptly shifted to an unfathomable calm. His gaze was as still as an ancient well, but his voice, through some psychic connection, directly sounded in Yi Feng's ear. You are very special. My psychic energy, actually cannot perceive your existence. Yi Feng looked up at the Logan beside him, his expression unchanged. Nice to meet you, Professor Charles. He had reincarnated from the Saint Seiya world, and although his psychic energy had not fully recovered, he had long since built an indestructible barrier deep within his soul. It seemed to be remarkably effective. You actually possess telepathic abilities as well. How many abilities do you truly possess? Professor Charles's voice carried undisguised astonishment. The words of persuasion he had prepared were completely rendered useless at this moment. Because he saw Yi Feng's eyes. There was no suppression or hatred, no anger or rage, only a serene indifference, and a certain unwavering sense of purpose. This completely overturned the conjectures he had formed based on the information. So, you specifically came to find me just to test me? Yi Feng responded expressionlessly. I just wanted to see you with my own eyes. Your existence will completely change the fragile balance between humans and mutants. Professor Charles did not hide his intentions. This delicate balance had been maintained for many years, and he absolutely could not tolerate anyone breaking it. A hypocritical balance. Yi Feng gazed at Logan, who was possessed by Charles's consciousness, his eyes seemingly piercing thousands of kilometers to reach the mind controller deep beneath the Mutant Academy. Charles, you and Eric have been playing this opposing act for so many years, have you perhaps started to believe it yourselves? Hearing Yi Feng's words, Charles, whose consciousness was far away at the academy, fell into an unusual silence. For the first time, genuine surprise flickered in his usually calm, water-like eyes. His parting ways with Magneto Eric was indeed the result of multiple factors working together. Differences in ideology, the instigation of his followers, but the most fundamental reason stemmed from a secret conversation on that night many years ago. Thoughts surged, and Charles seemed to return to the night that decided their fates, the eve of their public split. Eric, are you truly sure? A younger Charles looked at his close friend, his voice filled with unconcealed worry. Eric had endured too many hardships, his soul was already riddled with scars. The only belief sustaining him now was to secure a future for mutants. This future Magneto, whose name would shake the world, was determined to carve a bloody path for his people with his own strength. Charles, you should know my character very well. Once I make a decision, I will never look back. Eric's voice was stern and resolute. He was moving forward, step by step, along the path he had set for himself. Besides, isn't this also what you meant? Don't put all your eggs in one basket. If I fail, at least there's still you. Eric retorted, his gaze burning bright. Charles fell silent. This master of the mind, who was always eloquent and insightful, felt speechless for the first time. Since the exposure of Black King Sebastian Shaw's conspiracy during the Cold War, the threat of mutants had been brought to the forefront by high-level officials in various countries. As heroes who thwarted Black King's conspiracy, Magneto and Professor X naturally became objects of apprehension for various nations. Especially Professor X. Charles, the most powerful brain in this world, could temporarily suspend perceived time and even effortlessly browse anyone's memories. Such an existence posed a great threat to politicians in all countries. While Magneto was powerful, there were means to counterbalance him. Professor X's existence, however, was no less than a nuclear deterrent. This was also the fundamental reason why countries dared not openly target mutants. If Professor X were to turn to the dark side, the entire human civilization could instantly revert to a primitive era. No one wanted to see such a lose-lose situation. Thus, Charles and Magneto, adhering to their respective beliefs, embarked on two different paths to find a way out for mutants, one to be an enemy of humanity, the other to befriend humanity. For decades, they stumbled forward, exploring the future of their race. For a fleeting moment, Charles's eyes seemed to drift, as if he had truly achieved his long-cherished wish of peaceful coexistence between humans and mutants. But Yi Feng, standing before him, used stark reality to tell him, humanity's apprehension of mutants had never decreased. On the contrary, it had grown day by day. The current facade of peace was merely because humanity did not yet possess the strength to overturn the table. It seems you already have your own ideas, Charles said slowly, regaining his composure. Yi Feng gave him a very special feeling. The other party's demeanor and temperament were not at all like an 18-year-old youth. Instead, he resembled a wise man who had experienced much hardship. I naturally have my methods. I hope we won't become opponents in the future. Yi Feng's tone was calm. He certainly had no interest in disclosing his plans to Charles. The other party's stubbornness was deeply ingrained. If he were to learn that Yi Feng intended to reshape social order, his first reaction would definitely be to stop him. Because in Charles's view, Yi Feng's actions were more akin to those of a dictator, an act of revenge against the entire human society. So Yi Feng had no desire to confide. It was Magneto, however, who made him consider some form of communication. Is that so? It seems we are destined not to walk the same path. Charles sighed softly. Although there was no tyranny or hatred in Yi Feng's eyes, past experiences also prevented him from holding naive illusions about anyone. Charles understood that trying to win over Yi Feng was almost an impossible task. However, this meeting also made Charles feel a little relieved. At least Magneto also couldn't win over Yi Feng. Because Yi Feng was not a madman, he wouldn't have such extreme ideas as transforming all of humanity into mutants. The genetic technology Magneto relied on was inherently immature, and that plan was extremely risky. Charles gave Yi Feng a meaningful look. Deep within Logan's consciousness, he also sensed that mental barrier. This indicated that Yi Feng had already told Logan his plan. If he were to forcibly break through, his mental energy might suffer a backlash, and he would also completely offend Yi Feng, which would not be worth it. After a moment of thought, Charles abandoned the idea of probing Logan's memories. I hope our next meeting will be as friends. Charles's voice gradually receded, his mental energy retreating like a tide. Logan's calm eyes once again regained their usual wildness. Charles. The moment he regained consciousness, Logan roared in anger. Thanks to Yi Feng's mental barrier protection, he clearly heard the entire conversation between Charles and Yi Feng and realized he had been controlled. Alright, he's gone. As expected of the most powerful brain in the world, such immense mental energy is truly astonishing. Yi Feng said calmly. To what extent was Charles's mental energy powerful? With the Cerebro's amplification, even a gold Saint Seiya who could create thought forms and comprehend the seventh sense cosmos might not be able to compare in terms of pure mental power. Of course, each has his own specialty. In actual combat, 10 Charleses would not be a match for a gold Saint Seiya. Fortunately, I was prepared and set up a mental barrier in your consciousness. Otherwise, our plan would have been completely exposed to Charles. Yi Feng said thankfully. Even if Charles couldn't completely stop him, he could definitely create huge trouble in the initial stages. This was not what Yi Feng wanted to see. Although Charles was stubborn, he was not someone who couldn't be won over. I'll make him realize sooner or later that invading someone else's brain at will comes at a price. Logan suppressed his anger. He knew full well that he stood almost no chance against Charles unless he could launch a close-quarters surprise attack when the other party wasn't paying attention. But that probability was minuscule. With Charles's mental coverage, any slight disturbance would not escape his perception. We're almost at the Vatican. Yi Feng looked at the faintly visible city walls in the distance. Logan, this is where you get off. You should go now and proceed as planned. All right. When will we meet again? Logan stopped, turning to look at Yi Feng. His mission was to gather the mutants scattered across the world, though this was not his forte. But for the vision Yi Feng described, he was willing to try. Over the years, he had encountered a good number of mutants, and some of them were indeed forces worth striving for. When the Catholic Church announces me as the Pope's successor, that will be the day we reunite. Yi Feng's answer was brief and affirmative. Understood. Logan nodded, said no more, and turned to stride away in another direction. Yi Feng looked at the towering cross in the distance, a faint smile playing on his lips. The elemental light swirled around him, and his figure gradually blurred, eventually disappearing completely into the air. Thump, thump, thump. Inside the papal hall, clear footsteps echoed through the empty chamber. The old pope raised his head, hearing the unusual sound, yet showed no hint of panic, merely gazing silently at the empty hall. His attendants beside him showed no reaction, as if only he could hear the footsteps. Just then, a sentence abruptly sounded in his mind. The pope's expression remained unchanged. He gently waved his hand, signaling all the attendants on both sides to withdraw. Mutant. The pope spoke to the empty hall, his voice steady. He showed no concern for this sudden supernatural event, his eyes remaining profound. He sat alone on the papal throne, quietly awaiting the other party's appearance. It seems your holiness knows quite a bit about mutants. Yi Feng's figure slowly appeared, a hint of surprise flashing in his eyes. It seemed the Catholic Church was not as simple as it appeared on the surface. Upon reflection, this was reasonable. If the Catholic Church were truly useless, how could it occupy a place in the Marvel Universe, which was full of gods and miracles? One must know that even in the godly realm of the Pantheon, located at the ends of the universe, there was not a single deity belonging to the Catholic Church. The only thing in the Marvel world that could be linked to the Catholic Church was perhaps the 10th realm, heaven, which Odin had exiled in earlier years. But this heaven was not that heaven, their power differed greatly. Indeed, I have some understanding. The Pope nodded slightly. There are also mutants among the global believers. They once prayed to the Catholic Church to save them and grant them new life. It's just a pity I couldn't do it. He sighed softly, his tone filled with deep regret. He raised his eyes, looking at Yi Feng with an inquiring gaze, his experienced eyes revealing wisdom that saw through everything. Having held a high position for decades, he had witnessed too many people and events and had long seen through human nature. He could feel that the mutant before him bore no ill will, so he wanted to hear his intentions. I want to become the Pope of the Catholic Church. And reshape the existing order. Yi Feng said, word by word, his words startling. Even the weathered Pope was momentarily speechless, shocked by these two short sentences. Young man, do you know what you're saying? The Pope's gaze held scrutiny and doubt. He knew mutants possessed great power, but to completely overturn the existing social order, power alone was far from enough. Of course, I know. But given the current situation, the relationship between mutants and humans is a dead end. Charles is too idealistic, and Eric is too extreme. Only I can bring true salvation to this world. Yi Feng's expression remained calm as usual. He looked back at the Pope indifferently, but his tone was filled with undeniable confidence. What is your reliance? Is it power far exceeding Charles or Eric? The Pope's eyes narrowed slightly, the authority of a superior inadvertently revealed. If anyone thought the Pope was merely a benevolent old man, they would be gravely mistaken. It is my ability and the wisdom accumulated by great men. Yi Feng stretched out his hand, and a 7-colored elemental light flowed and alternated in his palm. Element control. As the name suggests, I can control all elemental forces in the world. I can easily replicate miracles, heal diseases, extend life. He paused slightly, and a golden radiance spilled from his hand, enveloping the Pope. At that moment, the old Pope clearly felt a surge of relaxation and vitality deep within his body, as if time had been quietly reversed. I can even easily destroy a city, a continent. Yi Feng's voice was still calm, but it carried a chilling power. You want to become a god. The old Pope saw through Yi Feng's plan at a glance. Currently, the existence of mutants had not yet been made public, confined only to high-ranking officials. If handled properly, Yi Feng could appear before the world as a god or a divine messenger. No wonder you chose the Catholic Church. The Pope suddenly understood, finally grasping Yi Feng's true intention for this visit. The other party wanted to create a god. With the vast number of Catholic believers, as long as miracles were displayed, the Vatican would immediately become a holy land, revered and protected by billions of believers. At that time, Yi Feng, as a mutant, under the title of Pope or Divine Messenger, even walking in broad daylight, no one would dare to harm him in the slightest. Because that would mean being an enemy to hundreds of millions of believers globally, which would be a disaster for any country. Perhaps some might find it exaggerated, but as Yi Feng said, a pope who could heal diseases, regenerate severed limbs, and even extend life would surely win the absolute loyalty of believers. Your Holiness should understand what my ability means. I can make the Catholic Church stand at the pinnacle of the world again. Yi Feng took a step forward, his voice steady and powerful. These words truly touched the Pope's heart. Having governed the Catholic Church for decades, he knew too many untold secrets. For example, the fact that other pantheons of gods indeed existed, even if they were now in slumber. This fact was undoubtedly a huge shock to the Catholic Church. All right. I agree to your terms. After a long deliberation, the Pope finally nodded slowly. As Pope, he had long stood at the peak of human power and wealth. These were no longer his goals. What he truly desired was to establish an ideal, perfect divine kingdom. And Yi Feng's appearance gave him hope. Not only because of the other party's mutant identity and abilities, but also because he felt a kind of long-standing, world-dominating aura from Yi Feng. Even if he refused today, it didn't rule out that the other party could still achieve his goals, just that the process would be more circuitous. Since that was the case, it was better to go with the flow. But you cannot show your face for now. According to your vision, you can first build your own forces. The current Vatican still lacks a reliable enforcement agency. The Pope added, his tone returning to its usual composure. Next, I will gradually elevate you to the position of Pope. The Pope continued, a wise glint in his eyes. Yi Feng nodded slightly. He understood that in an ancient system like the Catholic Church, even if one could display miracles, ascending to power in one step was a pipe dream. Only by proceeding steadily could one achieve great things. A week later, inside the solemn assembly hall of the Catholic Church, the atmosphere was heavy and reverent. Everyone, the Vatican urgently needs a dedicated agency capable of handling affairs in the underground world. I'm sure you've all noticed the frequent demonic incidents occurring globally recently, and many believers are gradually losing their faith due to unanswered prayers. We can no longer sit idly by. His Holiness the Pope sat on his high seat, his gaze sweeping over every cardinal below. When faith can no longer protect believers through disaster, that is when faith collapses. Talk of God is dead has even appeared in various parts of the world, which is a severe blow to the Holy See's prestige. Those present were all core high-ranking members of the Catholic Church, and their loyalty to the faith was beyond doubt. However, the practical problems made them look troubled. I am not against forming such an agency. But at a time when my Lord's miracles are not manifest, does the Holy See truly have the ability to deal with those supernatural events? Demons from hell are feared even by the Sanctum Sanctorum, and there are countless dark creatures roaming all over the world. I only fear that we will be willing but powerless, and ultimately do more harm than good with our good intentions. A senior cardinal spoke, his voice filled with deep worry. Other cardinals nodded in agreement. How could they not be clear about the predicament facing the Catholic Church? But with the long absence of miracles, facing those supernatural beings, holy water was useless, the Bible could only be read, and the cross lost its deterrent power. In such a situation, how could they break the deadlock? Faith alone would not make demons show mercy. But my Lord has already sent his divine messenger. I have personally received my Lord's oracle. His Holiness the Pope's voice suddenly rang out, his eyes gleaming with an undeniable light. Divine messenger. The entire assembly hall immediately burst into an uproar. His Holiness the Pope, is this true? Has my Lord really sent a divine messenger? Another cardinal stood up excitedly. Would I speak carelessly on such a matter? His Holiness the Pope responded calmly but firmly. The divine messenger is already within the Holy See. He will be responsible for forming and leading this extraordinary agency, and at the same time. His Holiness the Pope paused, his gaze sweeping across the room. He will also be the successor to the next Pope. This news was like a bombshell, leaving all the cardinals speechless for a moment. Reason told them it was unbelievable, but faith ignited a spark of hope in their hearts. What if the divine messenger had truly descended? Moreover, this concerned the succession of the papacy. In the Catholic Church's millennium-old tradition, the change of pope is a lifelong affair that would not easily happen unless the pope voluntarily abdicated or passed away naturally. Every cardinal had to treat it with utmost seriousness. His Holiness the Pope, may we? A cardinal hesitated, wanting to speak but holding back. His Holiness the Pope understood their concerns and nodded slightly, of course. My Lord, the divine messenger, please show yourself and let my Lord's believers witness your glory. As His Holiness the Pope's words fell, a dazzling golden light suddenly bloomed in the hall. Yi Feng, clad in a white robe embroidered with intricate golden patterns, gradually appeared in the holy light, from faint to distinct. Although he was of Chinese descent, with black hair and black eyes, in the glow of the golden holy light, he appeared incredibly sacred. His unique temperament made it all seem perfectly natural, and such a magnificent entrance successfully awed the cardinals present. The divine messenger has truly descended. A cardinal murmured, and some even had tears of excitement in their eyes. After a week of recuperation and elemental baptism, Yi Feng had fully recovered. Nourished by the power of the elements, his face was like jade, and his whole person seemed to emit a faint glow. God said, "Let there be light." Yi Feng's voice was not loud, but it resonated like thunder in the ears of every cardinal. Holy light filled the entire assembly hall, and everyone present felt a miraculous change in their bodies. A long-lost vitality surged within them, years of fatigue were swept away, as if they had undergone a sacred baptism. Welcome, my Lord, the divine messenger. Bathed in the golden glow, all doubts vanished. Even if Yi Feng was not a divine messenger, he had to be one now. With His Holiness the Pope's endorsement and the miraculous power he displayed, this was undoubtedly an excellent opportunity for the Catholic Church to return to its divine status. The cardinals present all understood what this meant. Since none of you have any objections, then the Star Saint Legion is officially established today. The Holy See will issue an official document to announce this matter, and its functions will not be elaborated upon further. His Holiness the Pope scanned the room, nodding with satisfaction. This decision also marked Yi Feng's formal entry into the core power structure of the Holy See. My Lord, the divine messenger, will not appear in public for now, His Holiness the Pope added. But he will select devout believers within the Church to become Star Saint Seiya. The specific candidates will be determined by my Lord, the divine messenger, and I hope everyone will cooperate fully. His Holiness the Pope smiled. Everything today had gone exceptionally smoothly. He seemed to already see the blueprint of the perfect divine kingdom he had dreamed of. After everyone dispersed, only His Holiness the Pope and Yi Feng remained in the empty assembly hall. How is your recovery? Is the plan we discussed earlier truly feasible? His Holiness the Pope asked with concern. Over the past week, the two had engaged in multiple in-depth discussions. His Holiness the Pope already knew that Yi Feng possessed the ability to bestow extraordinary power upon others, but this was temporarily shelved because Yi Feng had not yet fully recovered. Coupled with the elemental power Yi Feng wielded, it was enough to replicate some of the holy relics from myths and legends. Holy water with true exorcising power, water of life that heals wounds, crosses imbued with divine power, and so on. The appearance of these holy relics would undoubtedly propel the Holy See's prestige to an unprecedented height. When the time was ripe, His Holiness the Pope would officially announce Yi Feng's identity and publicly designate him as the successor to the Pope. I've mostly recovered. At the latest, within a year, I will be able to bestow extraordinary power upon others. The selection can be carried out in advance, but entering the extraordinary realm requires aptitude, especially reaching the peak of human physique. Such candidates are rare. Yi Feng replied. He paused for a moment, then continued to explain. The Star Saint Legion can have a maximum of 88 members. As a Gold Saint Seiya in his previous life, the power Yi Feng possessed was terrifying, otherwise, he would not have been able to directly invade the celestial realm. Perhaps due to his transmigration, his learning ability was incredibly heaven-defying. In the star-gazing tower of the sanctuary, he found the ultimate techniques recorded by previous Gold Saint Seiya and learned and mastered them one by one. Except for some combat techniques with special prerequisites that he used less frequently, he could perfectly replicate almost all the combat techniques of other constellations, and even make them more powerful, essentially making him a walking Saint Seiya encyclopedia. Unfortunately, in the celestial realm battle, he ultimately fell at the hands of Apollo. As the commander of the celestial realm after Zeus, Apollo's power already stood at the pinnacle of the gods. No matter how strong the talent, it still requires time to be realized. Inside a quiet room in the Apostolic Palace of the Vatican, Yi Feng sat cross-legged, the elemental light around him flickering and flowing, seemingly in sync with his breathing. Suddenly, a silent breeze emanated from his body, and the entire room trembled slightly. I've finally met the basic requirements. He slowly opened his eyes, a golden glow flashing in them for a fleeting moment. The ability of element control was far more powerful than he had anticipated. In just about a month since escaping the laboratory, his body had recovered from a near-death state to its theoretical human peak. Next, it's time to recultivate the power of the cosmos. Yi Feng stood up, clenched his fist slightly, and clearly felt the surging power within his flesh and blood. Although there was still a distance to reach his previous life's realm of surpassing mortals, with the power of element control and the fact that he was recultivating, he was confident he could resense and awaken his cosmos within a month. After all, this was not the original Saint Seiya world. Even if the Marvel Universe was inclusive and allowed different power systems to exist, cultivation would inevitably not be as smooth as in his native universe. It was almost impossible to recreate the glorious era of the Saint Seiya world, where individuals comprehended the seventh sense at the age of 11 or 12. According to Yi Feng's estimation, in the Marvel Universe, anyone who could successfully comprehend the sixth sense would already be considered a favored child of heaven. This was because, in this world, there was a decisive gap between mortals and Skyfather-level beings, a chasm extremely difficult to cross. Even by refining the sixth sense to its extreme, one could possess power comparable to Skyfather level. This was already the coveted upper limit for countless beings. The famous villain Thanos, whose power level was merely Skyfather level, was already able to rule over more than 5,000 life planets in the universe, with his Black Order and Sanctuary being the nightmare of countless civilizations. Even some of the gods in Marvel did not necessarily possess Skyfather-level combat power. In the days that followed, Yi Feng fully dedicated himself to the recultivation of the cosmos. The most basic condition for cultivating the cosmos was to temper the physical body to its extreme. Only by developing the five senses to their limit was it possible to comprehend the profound sixth sense. The Vatican had specifically allocated a training ground for him within the Apostolic Palace. It was also during this time that the Vatican publicly announced the establishment of the Star Saint Legion. As soon as the news broke, high-ranking officials from various countries discussed it heatedly. In the past few millennia, the Catholic Church had not been without its own armed forces, but as technology advanced rapidly, individual power became increasingly insignificant in the face of modern weaponry. Coupled with the long absence of miracles, the Catholic Church gradually retreated to the realm of pure spiritual belief, and its armed forces had long been disbanded. After nearly 1,000 years, the Catholic Church suddenly announced the rebuilding of its armed forces, naturally attracting countless speculations and prying eyes. Deep within the sanctum sanctorum of Kamar Taj, the trajectory of destiny has taken a new turn. The sorcerer ancient one slowly opened her eyes, the eye of Agamotto hanging quietly on her chest, not emitting the unique glow of the time stone. Though her face was aged, her gaze was like a torch. As the guardian of Earth and one of the most powerful sorcerers in the universe, Ancient One's power no longer needed the Infinity Stones to be proven. With her mastery of white magic alone, she had already stood at the pinnacle of mortals and many gods, reaching the peak of Skyfather level, an existence even the Asgardian Allfather and numerous dimensional demon gods were wary of. For hundreds of years, she had been like a stabilizing force, firmly guarding the reality dimension. But at this moment, she clearly sensed an unexpected deviation in the timeline. In this universe, where mutants emerged endlessly and the timeline was inherently fragile, reboots and deviations were not uncommon. Ancient One had always remained aloof, never bothered by them. Only this time, even she felt that the future was shrouded in mist, difficult to see clearly. Sorcerer Supreme, the Catholic Church has publicly issued a statement announcing the rebuilding of a legion named the Star Saint Legion. Should we? A Grand Master respectfully stepped forward, his tone hesitant. The Catholic Church. Ancient One looked up, her gaze seemingly piercing through endless space, landing in the direction of the Vatican. She knew that the one the Catholic Church worshipped had long since vanished, but the fact that they chose to rebuild their armed forces at this time was no coincidence. The root of everything, perhaps, lies here. No need to interfere. Ancient One murmured softly, then regained her composure. A great era is coming. The existence of the Catholic Church may be a variable, but it could also become an aid in the future. The Grand Master respectfully withdrew upon hearing this. Ancient One understood. God had indeed existed, and was even an extremely powerful ancient deity. But at some unknown point, the deity went into hiding, the divine light faded, and that being, proclaimed as omniscient and omnipotent, gradually faded from the stage of myth. Unlike the active pantheons of Asgard or Olympus, God's level of existence might even transcend ancient gods like the Vishanti, who represent the fundamental essence of the universe. God, is she truly returning? Ancient One had no intention of interfering. The Sanctum Sanctorum's duty was to protect humanity and stabilize the reality dimension. As long as it didn't involve the Earth's survival or human extinction, they rarely interfered in secular affairs, dedicating most of their energy to combating dimensional demon gods and Loki invasions. Meanwhile, Logan, who had long since parted ways with Yi Feng, also saw the statement issued by the Catholic Church. Did you do this? He murmured, though his words carried a slight question, he was already certain in his heart. Behind all this, Yi Feng must have been the driving force. He hadn't expected the other party's actions to be so swift. Interesting. And the various dark forces of the underworld and the lurking dark creatures also noticed the Catholic Church's statement. Most of them merely scoffed with disdain. In their view, the Catholic Church, having lost the support of extraordinary power, no longer possessed any deterrence. Rebuilding its armed forces was nothing more than a joke, and they paid it no mind. Time quietly passed. Bang, bang, bang. In the training ground deep within the Apostolic Palace, heavy thuds echoed continuously. A specially made sandbag weighing nearly 200 kilograms swung violently in the air, each impact producing a muffled thunderous roar. A sandbag of this weight would be extremely difficult for an ordinary person to even push, let alone strike so heavily. A slight misstep could even injure oneself. Boom. Finally, with a tearing roar, the sandbag snapped in half and flew backward. Your physical condition has probably already surpassed the limits of a human, hasn't it? The Pope had appeared at the edge of the training ground at some point, quietly waiting for Yi Feng to finish his training. More or less. Have the candidates been selected? Yi Feng took off his towel to wipe away sweat, his breathing steady as usual. The people who can meet your requirements. Within the entire Catholic Church, only 4 have been screened so far. The Pope handed over a document. Oh. There are actually 4. I thought there wouldn't even be 1. Yi Feng raised an eyebrow, a rare hint of teasing in his voice. The profiles showed 3 males and 1 female. When he saw the only female among them, a hint of surprise flashed in Yi Feng's eyes. In addition to physical condition and potential, the Pope had added faith as an important criterion for this selection. Not bad. We can arrange a meeting now. Yi Feng closed the document and nodded. After the Pope left, Yi Feng remained alone in the meditation room deep within the Apostolic Palace, slowly closing his eyes and entering a state of meditation. Candlelight flickered in the room, illuminating his serene face. With the blessing of his element control talent, he could clearly perceive the energy flowing around him. Each breath seemed to draw in the unseen elemental forces in the air. With this assistance, the improvement in his physical strength far exceeded expectations. He had originally thought it would take at least a month to reach the critical point of the next stage, but in fact, after only half a month, Yifeng already felt the loosening of that barrier deep within his soul. He was about to ignite the light of his cosmos once again. His consciousness sank continuously until it reached the origin of his soul. A strange yet pure light was quietly flickering in that depth, like a nascent star born in eternal night. The power of cosmos. I finally see you again. Yifeng gazed at that speck of light, a hint of deep nostalgia flashing in his eyes. But he did not dwell in sentiment for too long, his gaze quickly returned to sharpness and determination. Buzz. The next moment, his external body trembled violently. Without a sufficiently powerful physical body, even if he successfully ignited his cosmos, he would be unable to bear the power feedback it brought. At this very moment, Yifeng's muscles and bones were trembling at a high frequency, and his blood surged like a river. And deep within his soul, that speck of light began to flicker, contract, and distort violently, until it broke through an invisible threshold. Boom! A cosmic Big Bang, as if creating heaven and earth, erupted within his soul. Countless stars burst forth from the origin, magnificent light spread and flowed, nebulae slowly formed, stars ignited the star sea, planets orbited. A miniature and complete universe was evolving within his soul. This was the root of Saint Seiya's power, named Cosmos, guided by will, awakening the dormant divinity within the human body. As the universe within his soul continuously stabilized, Yifeng's body tremors also gradually ceased. A vast yet gentle power began to nourish his physical body in reverse. His blood, bones, and internal organs all underwent a qualitative leap at this moment. Now, even without using any supernatural power, he could, with just this body, overwhelm most so-called superhumans. No one knew that, deep within this quiet apostolic palace, a universe had just been reborn within a soul. It's still primarily psychokinesis. However, it unexpectedly strengthened the precision and range of element control. Yifeng slowly opened his eyes, and star rivers flowed and nebulae rose and fell within their depths. He slightly clenched his fist, feeling the surging power within him, and murmured, "I've finally returned to the sixth sense." Indeed, just as expected. Between the fifth sense and the sixth sense is the watershed between the mundane and the extraordinary. A Saint Seiya who truly steps into the sixth sense will not only awaken their own superpowers but can also break the sound barrier with their physical body, achieving supersonic movement. Their upper limit is extremely high, even eventually, traveling at the speed of light. This breakthrough also made Yifeng more clearly aware of the differences in cultivating cosmos in the Marvel Universe. In his previous world, he was an existence who broke the boundary between man and God, comprehended the ninth sense, and slayed gods with a mortal body. Even if he ultimately lost to Apollo, no one could deny his talent and strength. Yet even so, at the moment he ignited his cosmos, he still clearly perceived the existence of an invisible barrier. Although the upper limit had been opened, the difficulty of cultivation far exceeded that of the Saint Seiya world. Perhaps, this is the balance of rules in this world, Yifeng mused. In the Saint Seiya world, it was relatively easy for humans to cultivate cosmos, and it was not difficult for talented individuals to comprehend the seventh sense. However, wanting to break through the eighth sense, or even the ninth sense, was as difficult as ascending to heaven, as if deliberately shackled by the gods. But here, in the Marvel Universe, entry is extremely difficult, but once cosmos is successfully ignited, subsequent breakthroughs are smoother than in the previous world. Equivalent exchange. He gently shook his head, no longer pondering deeply. He reined in his aura, and the surging energy fluctuations around him gradually calmed down. The range and precision of element control have increased by nearly 30%. Mutant ability stacked with Cosmos, below Skyfather level, I should be in the first tier. Yifeng briefly assessed. But he was not complacent because of this. After all, this world never lacked monster-level mutants, and there were also some unreasonably overpowered individuals. He still had a long way to go. The next morning, Yifeng met the first batch of Saint Seiya Reserve members, carefully selected by the Catholic Church, in the training room on the west side of the Apostolic Palace. I've brought the people. See if they meet your requirements. The Pope's voice was gentle yet authoritative. 4 youths followed behind the Pope, ranging in age from 12 to 16, including 2 mutants. This age group, where the mind is initially mature and has a certain learning foundation, is the most suitable period for training. Yi Feng's gaze swept over them, and invisible psychokinesis, like a breeze, brushed past the 4, sensing their physical potential and energy fluctuations. Their physical qualities are excellent, and they have the potential to awaken their cosmos. He finally nodded. Then I'll leave them to you. The Pope showed a satisfied smile. Although he didn't fully understand what cosmos truly was, he believed what Yi Feng had promised. It was a supernatural system that could be popularized, and once cultivated, one could rival true superhumans. The Pope did not stay long and soon left the training room, leaving the space entirely to Yi Feng. Yi Feng turned to the 4 youths, their eyes held a mixture of nervousness, curiosity, and hidden anticipation. Starting with you. Introduce yourself, including your mutant abilities. He looked at the girl standing on the far left. Clarice Ferguson, 16 years old. My ability is spatial teleportation. The girl stepped forward, her voice clear and calm. She had an Eastern face but a pair of striking green eyes, giving her a calm and detached aura. Yi Feng had noticed her when he reviewed the material yesterday. She grew up in an orphanage under the Catholic Church, and her mutant ability had great strategic value. Savis, 15 years old. My ability is physical enhancement, but currently, I'm not sure of its upper limit. The next boy to speak was noticeably stronger than his peers. The other 2 were of ordinary origin, named Estelle and Wright, respectively. Although they had no mutant genes, their physical qualities and willpower were quite outstanding. The 4 had different personalities, but their eyes all shone with a desire to become stronger. Yi Feng's favorites were, naturally, the 2 mutants. It wasn't that he had prejudice against ordinary people, but mutants' inherent genetic advantages indeed made it easier for them to accept a system like Cosmos, which required strong life energy to drive. From today, you are the Saint Seiya Legion Reserves. When I deem you capable of standing on your own, you can officially join the Saint Seiya Legion. Yi Feng's voice suddenly became serious. At that time, all supernatural incidents involving the Catholic Church will be handled by you. Don't disappoint me. Bang! 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 Inside the training ground deep within the Apostolic Palace, the sounds of fists and feet colliding echoed incessantly, and the surging air currents reverberated in the spacious stone-built hall. Estelle and Light were engaged in close-quarters combat, their movements as sharp and swift as lightning. Despite their young age, their combat skills far surpassed ordinary people. Each strike was precise and fierce, and the crisscrossing of their footsteps stirred up gusts of wind. Even experienced adult warriors would find it difficult to gain an advantage against them. Under Yi Feng's baptism and blessing with element control, the 4 could train without any reservations. Elemental energy not only healed all their hidden injuries but also continuously strengthened their physiques. Precisely because they had no worries, their progress was rapid. Coupled with the constant tempering of their bodies by elemental power, despite their young age, their physical fitness was already comparable to that of elite veteran soldiers in the army. As mutants, Clarice and Savis, in particular, displayed extraordinary potential. Especially Clarice. As a space-type mutant, she adapted to her abilities extremely quickly, and her progress was astonishing. Not enough. Still not enough. Yi Feng's deep shouts echoed in the training ground. He and Clarice's figures flickered like ghosts, appearing and disappearing, and space seemed to tremble with their movements. Each appearance was accompanied by a strong collision, with waves of air surging and a buzzing sound piercing the eardrums. Boom! With a heavy punch, Clarice flew backward like a kite with a broken string, tracing an arc of more than 10 meters, finally falling heavily at the edge of the training ground. Your reaction speed is still not fast enough. Space-type abilities rely most on 2 points. First, reaction speed, and second, mental fortitude. You must specifically train and strengthen these. Yi Feng walked steadily, his voice calm but allowing no room for doubt. Clarice struggled to her feet, wiped the dust from the corner of her mouth, and nodded with determined eyes. Space-type abilities are exceptionally valuable. The portals Clarice opened were capable of cutting through all things, and even those terrifying sentinel robots found it difficult to resist. She could attack and defend, and even transport teammates thousands of miles in an instant. In the original work, with this ability, she could even travel to and from the moon. As long as she had been to a place and had its coordinates, she could open a portal. The only constraint was mental fortitude. In the original work, Clarice was often controlled by those with ill intentions due to her insufficient mental fortitude. Yi Feng, my lord, His Holiness the Pope requests your presence. A believer respectfully entered the training room and reported with his head bowed. As the commander of the Star Saint Legion, the head of the Vatican's only military organization, and a divine envoy, Yi Feng's status within the Vatican was already on par with His Holiness the Pope. Understood, I'll be right there. Yi Feng nodded, his gaze distant. He knew that the test had arrived. His Holiness the Pope sat behind a long table, his face unable to hide his fatigue. The establishment of the Star Saint Legion was like casting a giant stone into a lake with surging undercurrents, alerting countless entities. Especially those creatures lurking in the darkness. Recently, the Vatican's affairs had surged. His Holiness the Pope was old, and although his body had recovered somewhat after Yi Feng's elemental baptism, he still couldn't withstand the continuous days of exhaustion. You've come. His Holiness the Pope looked up, revealing a tired but relieved smile, and pushed a document toward Yi Feng. Yi Feng took the document, quickly scanned it, and showed no change in expression. Sure enough, they still couldn't sit still. The document recorded a horrifying supernatural event. A church in a remote town in the United States had been turned into a slaughterhouse overnight. The blood of 10 clergy members had been drained, and the scene was horrific. The case was initially handled by the local police but yielded nothing, eventually being reported through church channels all the way to the Vatican. The victims' families pleaded with the Vatican to intervene, praying for divine justice. Even without a miracle, the establishment of the Star Saint Legion has already touched their most sensitive nerves. This is a provocation from the dark creatures against us. His Holiness the Pope's voice was heavy with sorrow, and his eyes suppressed anger. Leave this matter to me. I will handle it personally. Whoever is behind this must pay the price. Yi Feng closed the document, his voice as calm as iron. His body had fully recovered, his cosmos had begun to awaken, and he was further aided by element control. Unless those legendary beings on Earth personally intervened, no one could stop him. Are you sure there won't be any problems? His Holiness the Pope hesitated slightly, as Yi Feng's identity as a mutant was still sensitive, and the bounty on the black market had not yet been withdrawn. Don't worry. I will take Clarice with me. For every mission from now on, I will bring one Legion member. This way, they can gradually adapt to real combat. Yi Feng's tone was firm. Good, you decide everything. The future of the Vatican will ultimately be entrusted to you. His Holiness the Pope nodded, his trust evident. He had long intended to retire, but currently, Yi Feng's foundation was not yet stable, and the Legion was newly established, still requiring his presence to support it. When the time was ripe, he would naturally relinquish his authority. Returning to the training ground, Yi Feng directly summoned Clarice. My lord, is there a mission? Her eyes flashed with anticipation, and also a hint of nervousness. Yes. After this, for each mission, I will take one of you to participate, until you are mature enough to stand on your own. Yi Feng nodded. Less than 30 minutes later, the two embarked on their journey. Yi Feng was still in his white robe with gold patterns, a magnificent tome glowing faintly in his hand. Clarice wore a close-fitting combat suit under her clerical robe, convenient for movement and combat. The incident occurred in a remote town in the United States. Yi Feng hadn't expected to return to this land so soon. Their attire clearly marked them as clergy, and with Vatican passports, their passage through customs was smooth. They did not deliberately conceal their whereabouts, so they were quickly noticed by various forces. Interesting, are they here for that church bloodbath? Star Saint Legion. We'll have to see what they're capable of. In the darkness, countless eyes watched them. Wait, isn't that the mutant with a bounty on the black market? How did he suddenly become a clergyman? Some recognized Yi Feng and were surprised by his change in identity. The black market bounty was still high, and the huge reward was tempting. Many were already stirring. If this job succeeded, it would be enough to live comfortably for over a decade. As for the Vatican's subsequent pursuit, they didn't believe the tiny country truly had the power to seek cross-border revenge. The hunt quietly began. He actually dared to come back. A certain financier behind the laboratory also learned of Yi Feng's whereabouts through his informants, and a sinister smile appeared on his face. This was his excellent opportunity to eliminate future troubles. He would not show mercy. My lord, it seems many people are watching us, Clarice said in a low voice, her perception keen. Ignore them. Stay close to me and focus on the mission. Yi Feng stepped into the special car arranged by the Vatican, his tone calm. The journey was silent, the vehicle moving quietly in the twilight until the sun had almost completely disappeared below the horizon before the two arrived at the ominous, shrouded small town. The tragedy had plunged the entire town into a silent panic. There were few pedestrians on the streets, and many households had their doors and windows tightly shut, as if even the air had solidified. Some families had even moved out entirely, attempting to temporarily distance themselves from this troubled place. The arrival of an unfamiliar vehicle naturally drew the attention of the remaining residents, and gazes, either wary or hopeful, were cast from behind windows. When Yi Feng and Clarice stepped out of the vehicle, their pure white Vatican attire stood out prominently in the dim light. This small town had a church, and most of its residents were believers. It was precisely because of this that the carnage targeting the church seemed even more appalling, even shaking the long-held faith of many. My lord, this way. A man of resolute demeanor and robust physique, middle-aged, had been waiting patiently nearby. Although he was dressed in plain clothes, his firm gaze and upright posture clearly distinguished him from ordinary people. A freighter. A hint of surprise flashed in Yi Feng's eyes. He could sense the considerable power contained within the other man. Yes, my lord, the man respectfully replied, slightly surprised that he had been seen through at a glance. Your physical condition is quite excellent. Have you not considered joining the Saint Seiya Legion selection? With your qualifications and faith, you shouldn't have been rejected. Yi Feng nodded approvingly. The man chuckled freely and replied, let's leave the opportunities for the younger generation. First, take us to the scene. Yi Feng stopped asking questions, motioning for the other to lead the way. The three walked quickly towards the church. The afterglow of the setting sun stretched the church's silhouette long and askew, and the surroundings were suffocatingly silent, with an indescribable, faint scent of blood lingering in the air. The police tape had not yet been removed, fluttering slightly in the evening breeze. Before fully stepping into the church, Yi Feng's brows were already furrowed. Dark creatures, it was the vampire's doing. It was a smell distinctly different from human blood, richer, more pungent, as if originating from a deep-seated bloodlust and depravity of the soul. The interior furnishings of the church were not severely disarranged, only some tables and chairs were tilted or toppled. This indicated that the attack was extremely swift, and the clergy had almost no time to resist, with even the chance of escape being minimal. How tragic, Clarice's voice trembled slightly. Although the bodies had long been cleared, the splattered dark red bloodstains and lingering negative energy still made her heart ache. She could almost piece together the horrific scene in her mind. My lord, the freighter's expression was solemn, wanting to speak but hesitating. Your mission ends here. Hand over the information you have to us. Return to the Vatican and report. Yi Feng interrupted him. The freighter bowed and quickly departed, understanding that this was not a battle he could interfere with. Yi Feng raised his hand and softly chanted, God said, let there be light. Instantly, brilliant golden light erupted from his hand, sweeping through the entire church like a tide. The foul bloody aura and resentment rapidly dissipated in the holy light, and within moments, the entire space regained its solemnity and purity, as if it had never been desecrated. This sacred light even shone far into the small town, and residents pushed open their windows and doors, looking towards the church in shock. Is that a miracle? The Vatican hasn't abandoned us. People whispered, gradually walking towards the church, where they met Yi Feng and Clarice emerging from inside. Please rest assured, everyone. The church has been purified, and a new priest will arrive in a few days. As for the perpetrators, they will certainly pay the price. Yi Feng's voice was gentle yet penetrating. His expression was calm, and he seemed enveloped in a sacred aura. A few words were enough to soothe the unease in everyone's hearts. The residents gradually dispersed, hope rekindled in their eyes. Your Eminence, where do we go next? Clarice asked after leaving the small town. To find the vampire. Yi Feng's gaze turned cold. Since we don't know exactly who did it, let them hand over the person themselves. A flash of killing intent flickered in his eyes. Currently, internal conflicts within the vampire community were constant, with clashes between pureblood vampire and dampirs escalating. Rapid technological advancements further magnified their weaknesses to UV light and silver weapons. Coupled with threats from existences like the Blade, their situation was far from what it once was. Although there were still humans seeking immortality and power willing to collude with the vampire, their strength and influence were no longer what they used to be. Yi Feng speculated that this incident was most likely an isolated act by a certain vampire, but he had no intention of spending time slowly investigating. The Star Saint Legion had just been established and had yet to build its prestige in the transcendent world. Since someone had actively provoked them, he naturally intended to use this to establish their authority. Night had fully fallen, and the vehicle drove towards the city's edge. My lord, this is a vampire stronghold. Vampire and dampirs have long gathered here. Order is chaotic, making it a blight on the city, Clarice said, looking at the information in her hand. Upon reaching their destination, Yi Feng did not rush in but waited at the entrance for a while. During that short time, many people came and went. Shadowy figures filled the alley, mostly young people dressed in hip-hop and punk styles. The two, in their white robes, looked out of place, quickly attracting many malevolent stares and whistles. Yo, father coming to a rave too. Wrong place, aren't you? They ignored them and continued forward. You priests aren't welcome here. Several pale-faced, sinister-eyed Dhampir men stepped forward to block them. Before they could finish speaking, Clarice suddenly struck. With a few thuds and screams, the men fell to the ground. Clarice flung open her robe, revealing the combat suit beneath, her eyes cold. Don't touch His Eminence with your filthy hands. The surroundings immediately quieted, and no one dared to block them again. The two strode directly towards the bar at the end of the alley. The moment they pushed open the door, a murky scent of alcohol, blood, and cheap perfume assailed them. The lights were dim, the music loud, and humans and vampire mingled within. Clearly, this was a vampire hunting feast, and many ordinary people who had been lured there were still oblivious that they had become prey. Looking at the two out-of-place figures, curiosity was evident in their eyes. People from the Vatican. What? You think not enough people died in that church? A cold voice came from the direction of the bar. Several vampires sneered, closing in, their eyes glowing with bloodthirsty red light. Or, do you also want to join the party? With miracles no longer manifesting, the Vatican, which had long been in decline on the transcendent side, was clearly not enough to instill fear in the vampire present. The space around Clarice began to subtly distort, and a fierce glint flashed in her eyes. Yi Feng, however, simply smiled faintly. Call your manager out. May I ask what brings the esteemed members of the church here? A seemingly elegant vampire slowly emerged from the shadows deep within the bar. His complexion was pale, and his movements carried an inhuman coordination, clearly indicating he was a pure-blooded vampire, with an eerie gleam in his eyes. Hand over the culprit responsible for the church massacre. Yi Feng, not bothering with pleasantries, cut straight to the chase. Oh. I don't know what you're talking about. The man's lips curved into a strange smile. Before he finished speaking, the surrounding air suddenly solidified, and an invisible pressure spread out from Yi Feng, as if even time had become heavy. The vampire's face changed instantly, finding himself unable to move. You're asking for death. Clarice, already short-tempered, saw the other party feigning ignorance and immediately activated her ability. Space seemed to turn into tangible shackles, firmly binding that vampire in place, completely turning him into a human-shaped punching bag. Yi Feng did not stop her. Instead, he felt a slight sense of satisfaction. Clarice indeed had good judgment, acting decisively and ruthlessly. The next moment, countless fist shadow rained down like a squall, all striking the vampire's body. In just a dozen seconds, all his bones were shattered, but under the forced fixation of the spatial ability, he couldn't even fall to the ground, only letting out agonizing screams. Ah! How dare you! The declining church, without the protection of a true god, you dare to be enemies with vampires. In intense pain, he still didn't forget to hiss threats, clearly not expecting the other party to act so decisively. I don't want to repeat myself a third time. Hand over the culprit. Otherwise, I'll destroy every one of your strongholds I come across. Yi Feng's tone was as cold as ice. Killing intent permeated tangibly, and all living beings in the entire bar, whether vampires or humans who had stumbled in, were awed by this terrifying pressure, their breathing involuntarily softening. A tremendous sense of crisis swept through the entire venue. The vampires present could no longer maintain their disguise, revealing their true forms, pale skin, crimson eyes, and sharp fangs, which scared the surrounding humans out of their wits, finally realizing they had become prey to be slaughtered. But under Yi Feng's suppression, no vampire dared to act rashly. My lord, we truly don't know who did it. The man, barely clinging to life after Clarice's torment, managed to force out a fawning smile. 3 days. Can you find him? Yi Feng walked up to him, his gaze calm yet terrifying. There was no emotion in his eyes, only pure indifference, yet it was more frightening than any threat. The vampire instantly understood. The other party didn't care about their lives or deaths at all. If they couldn't find him, he would just move on to the next stronghold and continue killing. Yes, I will use all my connections. To survive, he could only grit his teeth and agree. Very good, I'll await your news. Yi Feng nodded slightly, and Clarice then released the spatial confinement. The man collapsed to the ground like a pile of mud. If not for the vampire's tenacious vitality, he would have died long ago. Remember, only 3 days. If you can't hand over the person, you will all die. Of course, you can also try to call for reinforcements and see if they can protect you from me. Yi Feng turned around, his white robe sweeping the ground, his voice clear and cold. Even in such a gloomy environment, he remained holiness. With that, he and Clarice left indifferently. The still shocked humans also scrambled to escape the bar, following them. After this incident, the so-called hunting party naturally could not continue. Go. Find that scumbag. And report to the Elder Council immediately. Once he was sure Yi Feng and Clarice were far away, the vampire finally burst into a hysterical roar. Your Eminence, why go to such lengths? Clarice couldn't help but ask in the returning car. The Star Saint Legion has just been established, and the Church has not shown divine miracles for many years. The eyes in the dark dimension have long been stirring. This vampire crime is an opportunity to establish our authority. If we don't rebuild the Church's prestige, similar tragedies will only continue to happen. Yi Feng looked at the flowing night outside the window, his tone calm. He paused, then said lightly, besides, a mere vampire stronghold is not worth me personally chasing them to the end. He was waiting for a direct conflict with the vampires. Although the vampires' power was not what it once was, they still held a place in the dark dimension. As long as the progenitor Dracula was still alive, the vampires would never be completely annihilated. Human high-ranking officials and other alien race leaders also knew this, so they would only suppress, not exterminate. Once the slumbering Dracula was awakened, the entire world would face turmoil. That undead creature, transformed by the power of the Darkhold, was by no means an easy opponent. Although the vampires themselves were equally unwilling to awaken this old ancestor, so as not to have another mountain on their heads. The matter of Yi Feng and Clarice coercing the vampires soon reached the ears of the vampire high-ranking officials. They're asking for death. A mere church. In the Elder Council, roars echoed endlessly. They couldn't believe that even the church, having lost its supernatural protection, dared to challenge the vampires' authority. Kill them. Angry shouts prevailed. Yi Feng, leader of the church's Star Saint Legion, a mutant, the bounty in the underground world has not yet been withdrawn, but his abilities are unknown. Soon, information about Yi Feng and Clarice was presented to the conference table. A mutant? How arrogant. Send out a hunting party to deal with them. The elder's voice was cold. The resolution passed unanimously. This battle was unavoidable. If they were suppressed by the church, the vampires' status in the dark dimension would decline further, which they absolutely did not want to see, people from the church. At the same time, Blade also learned of the vampires' unusual activity. Looking at the intelligence in his hand, a sharp glint flashed in his eyes. He had dealt with many clerics before and knew that most of them were mortals. But since the other party was an enemy of the vampires, they were worth paying attention to. After a brief preparation, Blade also set off on the road to that city. 3 days passed in a flash. Yi Feng received no news. At midnight, the moonlight was cold, and the hotel room was silent. Yi Feng suddenly opened his eyes, his meditation interrupted by numerous unfamiliar supernatural auras. A nauseating smell of blood, he frowned slightly, his mental fluctuations subtly spreading. Clarice immediately appeared at the door, silently awaiting orders. Let's go. It's time to see what other trump cards the vampires have. Yi Feng stood up, his white robe moving without a breeze. His gaze turned towards the hotel entrance, where it was already surrounded by shadows, emanating killing intent. Go. Let me see your progress. Yi Feng lightly patted Clarice's shoulder, and a wisp of scorching fire element blessing flowed into her body. Buzz. Space rippled silently, and an excited, fierce gleam flashed in Clarice's eyes. Kill. Her emerald pupils glowed, and with a raised hand, she tore open space, and a portal suddenly opened before her. The tearing space suddenly opened before a vampire's chest, like an invisible blade, instantly ripping him in half. Although the vampire's blood no longer flowed naturally, the thick liquid accumulated within his body still gushed out, glowing with an eerie dark red under the moonlight. Clarice's unexpected strike caught the entire vampire hunting party off guard. Dressed in the Holy Sea's white combat uniform, she shot out of the spatial aisle like a bolt of lightning, moving at extreme speed. Even the vampires, renowned for their agility, had no time to react. In just 1 or 2 breaths, 3 vampires had already been sent flying by her heavy punches, their bones broken, crashing several meters onto the ground. Kill her. It was only then that the vampire hunting party finally recovered from their shock, and battle instantly erupted. There was no fear in Clarice's eyes, only boiling fighting spirit. To be able to use her abilities freely, without worrying about harming innocents, solely to protect the faith in her heart. This feeling made her soul tremble. In the darkness, countless figures moved at high speed, the sounds of fists and feet colliding incessantly. Yi Feng stood in the distance, indifferently observing the battle. Though it was late night, his vision was completely unobstructed, everything was in his sight. Clarice, who fought with increasing ferocity, had the fire element entwined around her limbs growing even more intense. Boom! Flames suddenly erupted, exceptionally dazzling in the pitch-black night sky. Ah! Punches and kicks imbued with flames were even more destructive. As soon as Clarice struck, a charred mark immediately appeared on the vampire's body, emitting the pungent smell of burning flesh. Just a simple blessing from Yi Feng had condensed such high-temperature flames on her fists and feet, making their lethality astonishing. The vampire hunting party, which had initially been evenly matched with Clarice, crumbled in an instant, with several members defeated, and the tide of battle completely turned. The Holy See is actually this strong. Blade stood on a distant tall building, quietly gazing at the battle below. He had originally come to provide support, but now it seemed he had been overly concerned. Only 2 people from the Holy See had come, yet they needed no help at all. Especially Yi Feng, who remained motionless, his white robe fluttering, gave Blade an extremely dangerous feeling. Bang! Another heavy punch was thrown. Clarice was becoming increasingly skilled in close-quarters combat. Her past experience fighting Yi Feng seemed to be etched into her muscle memory, every move was sharp and precise. The members of the vampire hunting party could hardly believe that they were being suppressed by a single person. Use guns. The leading vampire could no longer bother to hide, roaring hoarsely. Firearms were brought out one after another. Clarice's eyes narrowed, and the space around her began to ripple. Under the Holy Sea's training over the years, coupled with Yi Feng's recent guidance, her control over her abilities was quite refined. The spatial aisle opened again, swallowing all the bullets fired at her, which then returned through another aisle to the vampire hunting party. The dull thuds of bullets penetrating flesh rang out one after another, and screams were incessant. The vampire hunting party, armed with firearms, was completely suppressed by Clarice alone. Their close combat skills are a mess, and their superhuman physical abilities are not utilized at all. These guys' physical abilities are, at most, only 2 or 3 times that of an ordinary person. Centuries of ease have, after all, eroded the vampire's former strength. Yi Feng stood by, witnessing the entire process, and evaluated in his heart. The vampire's performance was far below his expectations, completely unfitting for their status as dark rulers of the Middle Ages. The battle had lasted only a few minutes, yet the vampire hunting party had already suffered heavy losses. Most members had lost their combat effectiveness, with only 2 or 3 barely able to stand. The battle was essentially decided. The Holy See actually has such power. The captain of the hunting party painfully looked up at Clarice. This woman's strength exceeded their expectations. He had originally thought this was an easy mission, but he didn't expect to encounter such a formidable enemy. Your Eminence, how should they be dealt with? Clarice did not act on her own initiative but turned to Yi Feng for instructions. Her breathing was slightly hurried, but her eyes were still bright, and the fire element surrounding her had not completely dissipated, flickering slightly in the night. Are you the captain? Yi Feng looked at the only man in the hunting party who was still conscious. From their earlier exchange, he was the strongest one. Yes, the other party responded through gritted teeth. Having identified his target, Yi Feng lightly raised his right hand, his fingers moving slightly. Ah 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 ah. Golden holy light suddenly burst forth from within all the vampires' bodies, except for the captain. The rest of the members all turned to ash amidst their mournful wails, scattering with the wind. The remaining captain stared blankly at this scene, completely frozen. He couldn't even comprehend the power Yi Feng had displayed. Boom. Psychokinesis swept through, shattering the captain's knees, and he heavily knelt before Yi Feng. He endured the intense pain, not making a sound. Since the other party had left him alive, it meant he still had value in surviving. Tell your vampire elders, the 3-day deadline has passed. I am taking over the stronghold in this city. If the perpetrator of the church massacre is not handed over in 3 days, I will take over another stronghold. This will continue until you hand over the perpetrator. Yi Feng's tone was calm, yet carried an undeniable sense of oppression. I understand. I will inform the Elder Council. The captain responded with difficulty, each word seemingly squeezed out from between his teeth. Get out. Yi Feng frowned slightly, and psychokinesis erupted again, blasting the other party dozens of meters away, heavily slamming him into a distant wall. PFF'd. The captain spat out a mouthful of blood. The intense pain almost made him faint, but Yi Feng's control over the force was just right, leaving him with a breath. After the vampire captain's figure disappeared into the night, Yi Feng suddenly turned to the other side. Won't you come down and chat? His voice was not loud, but it clearly reached Blade's ears. Blade snapped out of his shock, took a deep breath, and leapt down from the tall building, landing lightly in front of Yi Feng. I have no ill intentions. I just learned that a vampire hunting party was dispatched and wanted to see if I could help, he said honestly, while cautiously maintaining a safe distance. Eric Brooks. Blade, the Daywalker, the vampire hunter. You want to cooperate with the Holy See. Yi Feng said calmly, listing Blade's identity as if counting his own family treasures. Blade was slightly surprised but then relieved. With the Holy See's intelligence network, it was not strange for them to know his identity. Yes, I do have that idea. With the Holy See's intelligence network, I believe achieving my goals will be much easier. He responded frankly. Yi Feng quietly scrutinized him, his gaze seemingly able to see through people's hearts. Finally, he slowly said, you are not strong enough. Vampires are also far more complex than you imagine. They have been able to lurk in the human world for thousands of years without being exterminated, they have their own way of survival. This made Blade frown, but I have fought vampires for many years and understand their weaknesses. You only understand the surface. Behind the Vampire Elder Council or even older existences, those slumbering ancient vampires are the true threat. As you are now, you are not ready to face them. Yi Feng interrupted him. With that, Yi Feng turned and gestured to Clarice, we should go. In return for your kind support, I will tell you a way to improve your strength. Pay attention to the vampire's blood god ritual. This ritual can help you become strong quickly. As the portal closed, their figures disappeared into the night, leaving Blade alone to ponder. The events of the night had given him a completely new understanding of the Holy See. At the same time, he was also very interested in the blood god ritual Yi Feng had mentioned. Ah, please, spare me. That matter truly has nothing to do with us. A vampire, covered in blood, knelt on the cold, slick floor, begging humbly. His voice trembled, and his eyes were filled with terror. Clarice's face was expressionless, her gaze as sharp as ice. Without a moment's hesitation, she delivered a clean, powerful punch. Intense flames instantly engulfed the vampire, reducing him to ashes that dissipated into the air. With the fall of the last vampire, the entire bar plunged into a deathly silence. The mingled scents of blood and char permeated the oppressive space. Your Eminence, the mission is complete, Clarice said to Yi Feng, who was standing at the entrance, as she stepped out of the bar. Their teleportation portal had opened precisely at the bar's doorway, accurate and efficient. Snap. Yi Feng snapped his fingers, and the surrounding elements instantly became active. Holy light enveloped the entire alley. The dark, damp alley was purified thoroughly, leaving no trace of blood or struggle, as if nothing had ever happened. Let's go. We've done a good deed, Yi Feng said calmly, turning to walk out of the alley. Their figures gradually receded into the alley, eventually disappearing into the night. The secluded alley returned to its usual silence, but in the underworld, a huge uproar was stirred. Have you heard? The vampire hunting squad was wiped out. It was the Catholic Church's doing. The Catholic Church is that strong. It was that mutant who had a bounty on him before. Discussions erupted everywhere, and the news spread like wildfire throughout the underworld. The vampires' defeat drew significant attention from various factions. The vampire hunting squad was a renowned presence in the entire underworld, yet they were completely annihilated by a mere 2 people from the Catholic Church, even though they were fully armed. This was simply unbelievable. He's grown to this extent. In a dark corner, a person who had been following Yi Feng received the news. His expression grave, he pulled out his phone and dialed several numbers. Due to the conflict between the vampires and the Catholic Church, the underworld was in turmoil, with undercurrents surging. Even high-ranking officials in some countries began to notice the friction between the two sides and put pressure on both the Catholic Church and the vampires, hoping they would not escalate the situation. If supernatural powers were exposed, it would inevitably cause social unrest. Even the existence of mutants had always been suppressed by various forces, let alone more secretive dark creatures. However, the old pope's response was exceptionally firm. Either hand over the culprits who massacred the church, or the vampires and the Catholic Church would go to war. Faced with this spiritual leader of hundreds of millions of believers worldwide, some high-level national officials dared not be negligent. Someone once suggested assassinating the Pope, but this idea was quickly rejected. The assassination of a pope would be an even more sensational event than the assassination of a prime minister. Catholic believers worldwide would riot, and the country that issued the order would face international isolation. This was the special status of the Catholic Church in the world. United States, New York City, top floor of a skyscraper. Why is that fool still alive? He even became a member of the Catholic Church. In a luxurious office, a middle-aged man in a high-end suit roared in rage, sweeping the documents off his desk. His face was contorted with anger, and his eyes were filled with murderous intent. Boss, the most urgent task is to find a way to eliminate that mutant. The opponent is currently on a mission in the US and has even clashed with the vampires. This is an excellent opportunity. The assistant beside him pushed his gold-rimmed glasses, analyzing calmly. The lab was bombed, and the data was destroyed, but this did not mean they could rest easy. After all, mutant abilities were strange and varied, and one called telepathy could even read and tamper with memories, which was quite terrifying. The middle-aged man dared not gamble. He was wealthy and did not want to put himself in danger. Even if there was only a tiny possibility, it had to be completely eradicated. Contact the hand for me. Let them name their price. Get rid of that guy for me. The man finally calmed down, a ruthless glint flashing in his eyes. The bounty previously issued in the underworld was now useless. People who had harbored ideas about Yi Feng had, after witnessing his conflict with the vampires, backed down. Adding another bounty would easily expose him, so he thought of the notorious assassination organization, the Hand. It was full of ninjas skilled in assassination, and many mutants and super-powered individuals had met their end at their hands. This was the best solution he could think of at the moment. Understood, I'll take care of it now. The assistant bowed and exited the office. The middle-aged man slumped into the leather office chair, muttering, Yi Feng, his words were full of apprehension and anger. Meanwhile, in a hidden vampire castle, the atmosphere was equally tense. The captain of the hunting squad returned severely wounded, and the news he brought enraged the high-ranking vampire elders. The Catholic Church, an elder said through gritted teeth, his aged face clouded with gloom. They hadn't expected the Catholic Church to be silent for so long, only to make such a striking move. The mutant named Yi Feng hadn't even made a move. A single woman had defeated the vampires' elite hunting squad. Bang! Just then, the door was violently pushed open. A group of violent and sinister-looking vampires entered, led by Deacon Frost, the leader of the half-blood vampires. I heard you encountered some difficulties. Do you need help? Deacon flashed a sinister smile, looking at the elders present, his eyes full of mockery. Who let you in? This is a meeting for pure-blood vampires, not for you to participate in. An elder slammed his hand on the table and stood up. The vampire elders, already vexed by the Catholic Church matter, instantly erupted in fury. The half-blood vampires actually dared to challenge their authority. This was absolutely intolerable. Pure-blood vampires. Deacon sneered. Just you incompetent lot. If you weren't still useful to me, do you think you'd still be able to give orders here? His gaze suddenly turned savage. As he spoke, he raised his hand and gripped an elder's head, squeezing with such force that the elder groaned in pain. What do you want? The elder sitting in the center took a deep breath, asking with forced composure. The current situation seemed to have spiraled out of control. The vampire race has reached a point where it must be reformed. You lot have lived for ages, but you've made no contribution to the vampires. The so-called pure-blood vampires are nothing but a joke. Deacon said coldly. He looked around, his voice filled with undeniable authority. Your only value is to become the stepping stones on my path to becoming stronger. Deacon's subordinates had already taken control of the situation. All the vampire elders had been apprehended by his men. What exactly do you want to do? Do you really think by killing us, you can control the vampires? Naive. The central elder spoke again. Ha ha, ha 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 ha. Deacon burst into maniacal laughter. Do you know how much I've sacrificed to achieve my long-cherished wish? His eyes became fervent. Now, it's your turn to contribute to the vampires. Deacon signaled his subordinates to take all the elders away. The elders did not resist. Perhaps they believed Deacon wouldn't truly kill them, thinking he had other motives. But they didn't know they had already become sacrifices for a terrifying ritual. After all the vampire elders were taken away, Deacon pulled out a yellowed parchment from his embrace, his eyes gleaming with madness. Blood God sacrifice ritual. If I succeed, I will gain power comparable to Dracula. He softly read the words on it, a twisted smile forming on his lips. His voice gradually rose, filled with ambition and desire. What vampires? By then, I will be the new king of the world. This parchment was a fragment of the Darkhold. To obtain this fragment, Deacon had expended countless human and financial resources, searching the world for decades, and now he had finally achieved his desire. Everyone, let's discuss it. Should we take this job or not? Inside a hidden stronghold of the hand, dim lights illuminated 5 faces with varying expressions. Madame Gao scanned the other 4 leaders, her aged fingers gently tapping the table. Such a high reward was indeed worth the risk. It seems that boss is truly terrified, Murakami said with a sneer, a hint of vigilance flashing in his eyes. Is that mutant named Yi Feng really that strong? Alexandra asked with a frown, her fingers unconsciously caressing the rim of her teacup. The hand had assassinated mutants and superhumans before, but they rarely received tasks with such generous rewards. The employer not only set up a separate assassination fund but also promised that if they succeeded, the bounty from the underground world would also be theirs. The total exceeded $50 million. In the 90s, this was undoubtedly an astronomical figure. My suggestion is to take this job. But the specific action plan must be very carefully considered. Bakuto pushed up his glasses, his tone cautious. Sawande and Murakami also nodded in agreement. For the superhuman world, Yi Feng was a figure who had suddenly appeared. From being a wanted man to now clashing with the vampires, only about 3 months had passed, yet he had already shown astonishing changes in strength. According to intelligence from the vampires, Yi Feng's strength should not be underestimated. The hand had previously fought with vampire hunting parties, and both sides suffered casualties. However, Yi Feng's subordinate was able to single-handedly wipe out a vampire squad without injury, which was enough to prove the point. We must plan meticulously. It's modern society now. I don't believe anyone can withstand an assassination with thermal weapons. Even an existence like Magneto would be pierced through the neck by a specially made bullet. Madame Gao finally made the decision. Several days passed in a flash. Yi Feng and Clarice once again destroyed a vampire stronghold. This was already the third stronghold they had raided, and the number of vampires killed by Clarice had long exceeded 100. From her initial awkwardness to her current composure, Clarice's growth was visible to the naked eye. Under Yi Feng's deliberate guidance, her psychological state also showed no problems. It had to be said that her faith was very firm, which allowed her to maintain inner peace when facing gore. Your Eminence, there's new news. In a luxurious hotel room, Clarice, holding intelligence from the Vatican, came to Yi Feng's room. Tell me, Yi Feng said without lifting his head, continuing to read the book in his hand. Elemental light flowed and flickered between the pages, as if recording some mystery. There was indeed a coup within the vampires. The commotion was huge, all the elders of the pure-blood vampires were taken away by Deacon. As for what he intends to do, no one knows yet. However, he seems to be looking for Blade's whereabouts. Clarice reported. The light on the book paused, then dissipated. Interesting. It seems he's ready. A smile played on Yi Feng's lips. He naturally knew what Deacon was plotting. The blood god sacrifice ritual required the blood of a daywalker. Among all vampires, there were only two daywalkers. One was Dracula, an immortal being created by a remnant of Atlantis with the help of the Darkhold, who had almost no weaknesses, his only vital point being the Darkhold itself. The other was Blade. Blade's existence was an accident inadvertently created by Deacon. As a hybrid of human and vampire, he possessed the strength of a vampire and the habits of a human, yet he was not afraid of sunlight. In a possible future, Blade would even be chosen as a vessel, becoming the body for that remnant's revival. Let's go, let's join the fun. This matter should come to an end now. Yi Feng closed the book and stood up. By now, the vampires had paid a sufficient price. The culprit who massacred the church, the vampires could never hand him over, because he had already died at Yi Feng's hands several days ago. The reason for continuing to clear out vampire strongholds, besides disliking these dark creatures, was more for establishing authority. Knock knock. Just then, there was a knock on the door. Creak. The door opened, and Blade, covered in blood, stood at the doorway, clearly having just gone through a fierce battle. Mr. Yi Feng, is the blood god sacrifice ritual you mentioned earlier this one? Out of politeness, Blade did not step directly into the room, but merely stood at the doorway. In that short time, the blood at his feet had already pooled into a small puddle. You're badly hurt. Deacon has found you already. Yi Feng observed Blade's condition, not at all surprised. In the blood god sacrifice ritual, Blade was the most crucial link. Without the blood of a daywalker, Deacon's ritual would be greatly diminished in effect. That's right. Blade nodded, then continued to ask. I want to know, am I a part of this ritual? He always felt that Yi Feng knew many secrets. Although the other party's information seemed very transparent, this feeling grew stronger and stronger. That's right, and the most important part. You should know that although vampires are long-lived species, it is quite difficult for them to improve their strength. Including pure-blood vampires, their power limit is almost determined from the moment they are born or transformed, and even Dracula is no exception. Yi Feng admitted frankly. He paused, then continued, but it's not entirely impossible to improve strength. Clearly, Deacon has found a way. And this is also your opportunity. Yi Feng looked up at Blade. The other party was a typical dark hero. Not a good person in the traditional sense, but there was room for cooperation with him, at least at this stage. I think we can cooperate. If I successfully hijack this ritual, I hope to form a strategic alliance with the Vatican. Blade thought for a moment, then gritted his teeth and said. Seeing that Yi Feng did not interrupt, he continued to explain. After talking with you last time, I specifically looked into the history of vampires. Those hidden old monsters are powerful, especially the second and third generation vampires, who are almost invulnerable, not to mention Dracula, the progenitor. I think the Vatican also needs powerful allies. Blade knew that the alliance condition he proposed had no obvious benefits for the Vatican, and might even tarnish the Vatican's reputation, as cooperating with a hybrid vampire sounded unreliable. Interesting. Yi Feng didn't expect Blade to proactively propose cooperation. Just as Blade thought, cooperation between the Vatican and him indeed had no obvious benefits, but this did not mean that Yi Feng personally could not cooperate with Blade. I can cooperate with you, but only as myself. It does not represent the Vatican's position. Yi Feng finally said. The other party involved the Darkhold, so it was worth strategizing. Blade agreed without hesitation. Good. He had come specifically for Yi Feng. As long as Yi Feng agreed to cooperate, nothing else was an issue. Let's go, meet your old friend. Yi Feng stood up and walked to Blade's side, casually patting his shoulder. A strong vital energy surged into Blade's body, green light flickering. His wounds healed rapidly at a visible speed. The wood element life energy, drawn from plants and trees, had an astonishing healing effect even on a hybrid vampire like Blade. Thanks for watching.